It all started at night, at a time when all good children should already be sleeping. However, one little girl still could not plunge into the kingdom of Morpheus. And all because the temperature in the baby's room was too low. It was so cold that it was impossible to sleep, so the young miss could only hope that she at least wouldn't get sick. The girl's name was Anissa, and then she heard someone say her name. The little girl quickly realized who exactly had come to see her at such a late hour, because it was Anissa's older brother, whose voice she couldn't help but recognize. The boy's name was Dietrich Lagrange. He was only 8 years old, and now he was worried that he had woken his sister. But the girl replied that this was not true because she had not slept before her brother arrived. Dietrich was young, but he already controlled the shadow as if it were his own hands, so that with its help he was able to stroke Anissa's head. The young man treated his sister very tenderly, although he was cruel to others. The girl knew this because, in fact, in her past life she was an ordinary person, but she ended up in a novella that she had read earlier. And now the heroine lives in a reality that previously was for her just a novel called The War of the Roses of Those Men. So it was known that Dietrich was the only heir of the Lagrange family who got rid of other candidates for power. The young man could have had everything, but he was defeated by the main character named Hermann Euclid. So the young man in this novel was the main villain who ultimately loses. And now Dietrich was thinking that his sister had not slept because other people had come again. And while the guy was worried about Anissa, she, in turn, was thinking about how much prettier he would become when he grew up. But then the young lady came to her senses and asked her brother who could have come to her if he had such an assumption. Then Dietrich decided to change the subject, asking whether the baby had begun to show abilities. Anissa knew that she was not born with the ability to control shadows, unlike the boy. But the guy himself didn't know about this yet, so in response to his question, he only heard an apology. The main villain didn't even realize that his sister knew much more than he did. Moreover, Dietrich didn't know that Anissa wasn't actually his sister. The young miss was born into the Euclid clan, which was not on the best terms with the Lagrange family. So, in fact, the baby was the sister of the man who would seal Dietrich. In fact, Hermann himself does not know about the coexistence of his younger sister. And all because Anissa is the only one in the Euclid family who was not born with the power of the sun. This family had always been under the protection of the sun god, and such an incident could ruin their reputation. Even Anissa's mother rejected her, not wanting to admit that she had given birth to such a child. The woman rejected her daughter and hoped that the baby would not live long. But then the girl was kidnapped by the Lagrange clan, and the Euclid family, for whom she was an eyesore, did not look for her. In this unusual way, Anissa became the youngest daughter in the Lagrange family, and the girl understood perfectly well that until she left this terrible house, she could only trust her brother. The heroine understood perfectly well that she was not in the best position now. Even though Anissa was born an aristocrat, everyone despised her, and it was obvious because she only had one toy. The Lagrange family had no intention of spending money on the baby because she had no abilities. So the girl had no choice but to get along with Dietrich, while the others considered her worthless. And then the boy said that he had a gift, and then threw a rattle on his sister's bed. This angered the young miss because she was already too old for such surprises. So Anissa took the rattle to return it back to her brother, and as soon as the gift was in the girl's hands, the innocent toy turned into a weapon. The little girl didn't expect this, so she was very surprised by what happened, so much so that she froze in place. It was strange because few people would think that a hidden knife would be a great gift for a child. It turned out that the rattle turns into a weapon if you shake it, which is what Anissa did, and if someone wants to get into the girl's room to harm her, then she will have to use this knife. Dietrich also added that his sister could shake a rattle right in front of an enemy's throat. But the little girl wasn't sure she looked like the kind of child who could stab someone, so Anissa dropped the hidden weapon and said she couldn't do it. The young lady did not understand why her brother was behaving this way, since he was only 8 years old. So the girl reminded Dietrich that she was just a child, so she couldn't hurt anyone. Anissa couldn't even write, and then they told her that she would have to fight. The little girl hoped that such a rich family would have a good fate in store for her, but she was wrong. In her past life, the heroine was an outcast in her own family because she was not as talented as her brother and sister. Therefore, the girl thought that reincarnation as the Duke's daughter would be better than her past life. However, Anissa Euclid's fate was not bright either, so all hope was lost. But there was nothing to be done, so I had to come to terms with the new reality. At least in her past life, the heroine's family raised her properly. The girl, realizing the situation she was now in, sighed heavily. This was heard by the servant Lancel, who was looking after the baby, and he wondered what exactly she was unhappy about. It was difficult with children, so the man who was ordered to look after Anissa was not particularly happy about it. After this, the servant began to talk about how sorry he felt for Madame Camilla. Lancel was offended that his mistress died after giving birth to such a mediocrity. And if the lady had lived, the man would have been spared the miserable burden of changing children's diapers. The servant wailed so long and loudly that the little girl's ears even hurt. Camilla, whom Lancel cried about, was one of the wives of Duke Lagrange, and she was also the mother of the main villain. The book said that Madame died giving birth to Anissa, but in reality this was not true. Because in reality, the girl was the daughter of Duke Euclid, an enemy of the Lagrange house. While Camilla was still alive, they brought her a baby girl stolen from a rival. And the heroine was amazed at how beautiful Madame Lagrange was. The woman was about to take the child away, but she was then captured and killed by the Knights of Euclid. Of course, Camilla couldn't resist a large number of men, so no matter how hard Madame Lagrange tried, in the end she was defeated. Anissa knew perfectly well that the knights were pursuing them only to kill her. Although from the outside it seemed that the soldiers wanted to save the child, in reality everything was completely the opposite. Camilla was not the attacker's target, she was simply caught in the crossfire. The knights had no intention of leaving witnesses, so they spared no one. So one of the men raised his sword over the woman's head, struck, and the little girl didn't remember anything after that. Thus, Camilla and her child died, but Anissa somehow survived and was accepted by the Lagranges. Although it was better than dying, life in this family was not much different from the previous one. After all, now the girl was being looked after by a servant who simply hated this occupation. Lancel didn't know how to handle children, so he grabbed the little girl's hand tightly. Because of this, Anissa began to cry, which angered the young man even more. The servant believed that at this moment it was he who should be shedding tears, because his situation was worse. The man blamed the little girl for all his troubles and could not hide it. Anissa understood this and saw that an aura of black hatred hovered around Lancel. However, if you look closely, you can see that the middle was blue. This color meant that the young man was truly sad. The servant was truly hurt by Lady Camilla's abandonment of him. Even though Anissa didn't have the abilities of the son Euclid, she still had some skills. The girl has the ability of energy that sees and understands the aura of people and can also foresee the future. Suddenly, the servant simply turned around and began to leave the baby's room. The man even slammed the door behind him, hinting that he would not be returning soon. This angered the girl, who was left in the room completely alone. The heroine, of course, understood everything, but she was still a little child who could only cry. However, even tears did not help, as if the servant did not want the girl to survive. There were more than 20 children officially registered in this family, so it was natural that someone would be left unattended. And Derek Lagrange only cared about those who had passed a thorough check. So the Duke valued only those who became candidates for succession. So all the children tried to stand out by showing skills that go beyond imagination, because of which the girl understood perfectly well that she was in danger. While Anissa was trying to call the servant, the boys came running instead, attracted by the noise. The brothers, seeing the child, decided that they had to deal with him. The boys tried to hurry before someone came and chased them away. The children had a bright yellow aura, which meant they enjoyed what they were doing. And this was predictable, because eliminating competitors was one of the many tests in the Lagrange family. It was dangerous to be weak in this house because the strong felt they could go unpunished. Although the girl understood that she was in big trouble, all she could do in response was burst into tears. But then the little girl began to notice that her tears seemed to be helping. After all, the boy stopped and did not harm the little child. So Anissa continued to cry, hoping that the boy still had some conscience left. However, as it turned out, it was not pity for the child, but simply fear. After all, Dietrich entered the room and began asking the brothers what they were doing there. Seeing the stronger one, the boys immediately began to worry, losing their control over the situation. That time, Anissa first met the man who would become the future main villain. However, due to her position, the baby did not fully see Dietrich's face, which upset her. The girl still couldn't control her body, so she couldn't get up. Meanwhile, the boys tried to drive their brother away, but it was obvious how much they were afraid of him. And then Anissa saw how her offenders suddenly shot up above her stroller. It turned out that it was Dietrich who raised the boys with the help of his shadow, after which the young man approached the carriage, wanting to see who was lying there. It was then that the girl was finally able to see the face of the main villain. And then one of the offenders began to shout that newborns always became victims of the heirs. After all, it's best to get rid of an opponent when there's no one to protect him. These words angered Dietrich because at that moment the young men were talking about his own sister. So the future villain tightened his grip, which hurt the boys. Then the offenders began to promise that they would not approach Anissa again. Eventually, Dietrich got tired of torturing his brothers and finally let them go. But the guys still didn't understand why the young man was preventing them from eliminating their rival. To which the future villain replied that he had set himself the goal of protecting the baby. Dietrich didn't like the question itself, so he began to thicken the shadows around the boys again. And when the brothers came to terms with the fact that they couldn't hurt Anissa, they were finally allowed to leave. The young men didn't think for long, but immediately started running away from the girls' room. The little girl was amazed by the way Dietrich, who was only 6 at the time, behaved. It was then that the heroine realized that she needed to stay close to her brother in order to stay alive. So the heroine chose the future villain as her protector until she escaped from this house. And then Anissa saw how the young man sharply clenched his fist, and then strange sounds were heard. The baby couldn't see anything because she still couldn't lift her head. However, it was not difficult to guess that Dietrich still took the lives of his brothers. The girl thought that the young man would let her offenders go, but he turned out to be merciless. After which the boy turned towards his sister and then began to approach her. Anissa wasn't afraid because she knew her brother wouldn't harm her. So Dietrich was the only one the heroine could trust in this house. And the heroine really needed someone to help her survive in the body of a child. The young man will only learn of Anissa's true origins after the war breaks out, but before that, he can be an excellent ally. However, no matter how much the little girl tried to be nice, it had no effect on her brother. Moreover, the girl was very surprised that the guy's aura was completely colorless and did not display any feelings. Since Dietrich entered this room, his aura has not changed. The girl wanted to take her brother's hand, but he immediately pulled her away. But even after this, the baby did not cry, continuing to show herself to be good. The heroine understood that she needed to make friends with the guy for her safety. So no matter how much Dietrich was indignant, she still reached out her hands to him. And in the end, Anissa managed to firmly grab the young man's finger, and he resigned himself to it. Moreover, although the baby could not speak yet, she said something similar to the word brother. At first, the boy didn't understand what exactly his sister was trying to say. But after some time, Dietrich realized that the girl was addressing him. Because of this, the young man thought so hard that wrinkles even appeared on his forehead. The brother wanted to say something to the girl, but he was interrupted by the door suddenly slamming. A man entered the room, and a strong aura appeared behind him. The aura was so powerful that it absorbed almost the entire room. Moreover, the heroine was very frightened by the blood-red color she saw. The little girl didn't even have to look to see who came in, she already understood it. And all because the one who came was the head of the Lagrange house named Derek. The man's aura, containing cruelty, bloodthirstiness, anger and jealousy, could be felt from a distance. Derek, as soon as he entered, asked his son whose child was next to him. The boy replied that the baby was the daughter of Camille Lagrange. Meanwhile, the girl was thinking that she had nothing in common with her birth mother, since no one had guessed her origins. Meanwhile, the man began to think, and then it became clear that he did not remember his own wife. Derek even asked Dietrich who this Camilla they were talking about was, and the little girl was surprised at what a terrible person the head of the Lagrange house was. Eventually, the man began to remember something about the woman who was his wife. It turned out that Camilla was a battle slave that Derek had purchased. Then the man wondered where his wife was now, to which the boy replied that Camilla died after giving birth to a child. This upset the chief, not because he felt sorry for the woman, but because she turned out to be a waste of money. However, the man was not too worried about this, because Camilla had already given birth to a candidate for his successor. The man said all this in front of his son, who had lost his mother. Lagrange did not value other people's lives at all, but thought only of himself. Derek advised the boy not to rejoice yet, because many who also aimed for the place of the heir later died. So either Dietrich shows his father all his skills, or he dies. To this, the young man merely replied that he would keep in mind the words of the head of Lagrange. The little girl, who heard the whole conversation, was shocked by Derek's cruelty. The girl was very angry at the way the man spoke about his wife and children. The man, meanwhile, had already turned around and was about to leave, having first ordered his son to behave decently. As soon as the head of the family left, the young man turned his attention to his sister. At this time, Anissa could not express her hatred for Derek in words, so only gestures remained. But as soon as Dietrich looked at the baby, she again became a sweet, smiling child. After this, the young man thought for a while, continuing to look at his sister. And then the boy put his hand to the child's forehead and used his powers. Then the boy admitted that he could not detect any abilities in Anissa. The girl then immediately realized that her brother was using magic to find out what gift she had. It was amazing how well Dietrich handled his abilities, even though he was only 6. After all the checks, the boy concluded that the baby would definitely not survive in this house. The young man didn't even realize that Anissa understood everything, and therefore had already come up with a plan. The heroine was not going to part with life so easily, and Dietrich himself would help her with this. After all, the girl wanted to hide in the shadow of her brother and thus survive. However, after some time it began to seem that nothing would work out. And all because Dietrich never visited his sister again after they met. But then the little girl heard some steps and hoped that her brother had come to her after all. Be that as it may, it turned out to be just a hot-tempered food delivery man. The man immediately started talking about how disgusted he was to go to the child. The milk formula that the servant brought turned out to be too cold because he was not particularly worried about the girl. In any case, I had to eat what they gave me because there was no other choice. The man, seeing the child's discontent, began to scold her even more harshly. Anissa, meanwhile, was dreaming about how she would fire the servant when she gained power. After all, the girl really didn't like the way the ordinary worker treated her. The man will definitely later regret that he behaved so terribly. The servant, meanwhile, concluded that Anissa was very bored lying in bed. So Lancel decided to just leave the little child to play alone. Before leaving, the man asked the little girl not to make a mess and to play quietly. Thus, for the first time, the girl found herself outside her usual place. And the servant calmly left, deciding that it would be a good idea to leave the child alone. The heroine then once again promised herself that in the future she would punish Lancel. But then the girl decided that this was her excellent chance to finally escape outside the room. So, as soon as the servant left, Anissa hurried to the door, which was not yet closed. And then the little girl managed to block the door with a toy, preventing it from closing completely. Thus, the child had a path to freedom, which made her very happy. The heroine couldn't walk yet, so she had to crawl around the mansion. After which the girl decided to go to Dietrich, so she started looking for him. After a while, Anissa began to feel like she looked like a dog, but in any case, I didn't want to miss the chance to see my brother. The heroine quickly guessed that Dietrich would end up in the place where he had been locked up since childhood. It was a garden of withered roses, into which the little girl immediately headed. The girl was right, because her brother really did end up in that place. Overjoyed, Anissa immediately hurried to the young man to attract his attention. The little girl tried to talk to Dietrich, but she was still having trouble. And then the girl noticed that her brother, as it turned out, was not alone in this garden. The boy who was buried was named Ulrich, and he ended up there because he broke the rules of the game. Because Ulrich was screaming and asking to be let go, Dietrich did not notice his sister. However, the little girl still managed to attract her brother's attention. The girl wanted to ask the boy what he was doing, but he didn't understand anything. In any case, Dietrich reached out his hands to his sister, wanting to lift her from the ground. After which, the guy asked the little girl to speak like a human. But the heroine couldn't pronounce words properly yet, so all she could do was try to be nice. The girl tried to smile at her brother as kindly as possible, just to please him. However, Dietrich's emotions still didn't reveal what was on his mind. The baby's joy was already in the fact that her brother continued to hold her in his arms. And then Anissa still hoped that she had a chance of survival. After which, the girl remembered the third person who was in this garden. Ulrich, as soon as they noticed him, started screaming again. In the novel, the heroine had already come across the name of the buried young man, so she knew who he was. The girl clearly remembered that Ulrich was Dietrich's right hand, but it was unclear why he was in such a position. In the book, Ulrich Lagrange slit Derek's throat on Dietrich's orders. And the man also did not abandon his brother, whom Hermann later sealed. Ulrich was a loyal subject who remained on Dietrich's side until the very end. So the little girl didn't understand why her brother's assistant was now in the ground. Meanwhile, Ulrich himself was getting angrier and angrier because, understandably, he didn't particularly like his situation. But Dietrich paid no attention to his friend, telling his sister that she spoke like a chicken. And just as the little girl began to rejoice, her brother told her to get off. The girl thought that she had managed to charm the young man, but everything turned out to be not so simple. The guy lowered his sister to the ground, then turned around and started to walk away. But Anissa didn't want to let her brother go so easily, wanting another chance. The heroine tried to catch up with the departing young man, but he moved much faster. The little girl understood that if she lost Dietrich now, it was unknown when she would see him again. And then Anissa felt a strong pain and realized that she had run into glass. The girl was in such a hurry that she didn't notice what was lying in the grass. The splinter bit into his hand too hard, so blood started flowing immediately. Hearing what was happening behind him, the young man stopped but did not turn around. Meanwhile, the baby started crying loudly because she was really in pain. Anissa was also upset that her brother probably wouldn't help her. And then the girl saw that a red aura began to approach her. The little girl immediately thought that Dietrich was angry because she was crying, after which the heroine began to hold back her tears so as not to evoke negative emotions. Anissa knew her life depended on it, so she continued to endure. Then Dietrich approached his sister to ask why she wasn't crying, after which the young man said that the baby would not survive in this house in any case. So, in the guy's opinion, it would be much better if Anissa died sooner. Because of these words, the heroine decided that Dietrich would now take her life. However, instead, the young man leaned towards his sister to help her. The first thing he needed to do was get the glass, which the guy did right away. It wasn't the most pleasant procedure, so tears still began to flow from Anissa's eyes, although Dietrich tried to do everything gently to make it less unpleasant. In the end, the young man managed to extract the splinter from his sister's palm, after which the brother carefully wiped away Anissa's tears, which surprised her very much. The guy had seemed very cold before, but now he showed a completely different side of himself. Because of this, the baby simply froze in surprise and stopped crying. Dietrich then noted that Anissa was a very strange child, which was unexpected because the heroine thought that her brother was much stranger than she was. After all, the young man always behaved aloofly and even buried his future assistant. Meanwhile, the guy tried to carefully bandage the baby's hand. Dietrich didn't look like the kind of child who would become a villain in the future. Even though the brother did everything very carefully, the baby still felt pain due to the wound coming into contact with the fabric. But Anissa was afraid to cry because she didn't want to anger her savior again. So the heroine simply endured, not wanting to cause any unnecessary inconvenience. And then the girl began to think about how she could return to the room in such a state. But fortunately, Dietrich decided to help his sister in this matter as well. Anissa wouldn't be surprised if the young man left her in that state. But the future main villain turned out to be much softer than the heroine thought. It was strange to realize that in the future, Dietrich would become a cruel man. Perhaps all this will happen because Lagrange is too cruel to his children. And as her brother carried Anissa back to his room, she realized something important. The huge palace through which the boys were moving was completely empty. It seemed that there was no one else in such a large room except for the children. Eventually, the girl noticed familiar doors and realized that she had been brought into a room. There was a woman inside, to whom the young man immediately told that the child was badly injured. However, the maid did not understand what she should do about it now. It was obvious that the maid treated the boy terribly, but killing her was impossible, as that would automatically exclude her from the candidates for heir. So Dietrich just politely asked the woman to cure the child. The maid decided that the young man had injured the little girl himself, and now for some reason was asking for help. Anissa was amazed that the maid would allow herself to make such statements. And when Dietrich said that he had not harmed the child, they did not believe him. In the palace, everyone knew that the young man was born to a slave, and therefore everyone treated him with contempt. The guy was unpleasant to hear this, which made him very angry. But Dietrich still kept his composure and calmly asked for his sister's wound to be treated. However, the maid was not going to do anything, because she knew that Anissa would soon die anyway. Hearing this, the girl began to scream loudly, wanting to argue with the maid. Moreover, the woman had no medicine to treat the wound, so she could do nothing to help. It turned out that the young man knew that the gold allocated for the children was taken by the servants for themselves. That is why there were no drugs in the castle, because there was not enough money for them. And then the maid told Dietrich not to accuse people without evidence. In the end, the guy had to hide his character and behave well. The maid's last words were unnecessary because the young man's patience had run out. Dietrich was no longer going to hide his anger, even though there could be consequences. The little girl immediately noticed how a red aura spread throughout the room. The young man was not going to let the maid go so easily, holding her back at the door. After which Dietrich told the maid to give him the medicine, since she herself could not cure the child. Frightened, the woman began to scream that she had no medication. The maid tried to close the door, but the guy didn't let her do it. The heroine, seeing this whole situation, hurried to her brother, even though her arm was wounded. And then Anissa grabbed the young man by the leg to prevent him from making a mistake. The girl, although still very weak, began to pull Dietrich by the leg. Because of this, the boy nevertheless let the maid go, because he turned his attention to his sister. The guy couldn't understand why the little girl had gotten involved in this argument. The young man had no idea that Anissa wanted to save him from doing something wrong. Besides, Dietrich thought that his sister did not understand a word he said. The heroine felt that her brother looked very lonely, and she wanted to somehow support him. And since the girl couldn't speak yet, she could only smile. Then Dietrich couldn't stand it any longer, and said that he thought his sister's behavior was stupid. But Anissa did not show outwardly that she was offended by these words, after which the brother thought for a bit and then took the child in his arms again. The young man asked the girl to behave decently and then carried her out of her room. The guy didn't say anything else, so Anissa didn't fully understand where they were taking her. Eventually, the boys came into another room and sat the baby down on the bed. And then the heroine quickly guessed that Dietrich had brought her to his room. While the girl was looking around, her brother started looking for something in his things. When the young man found some jars, he confessed to his sister that he had never treated anyone before. Before helping, Dietrich asked Anissa not to cry because he didn't like it. But the little girl wasn't sure that she would succeed because she was in a lot of pain. Nevertheless, the heroine tried to hold on so as not to anger her brother. The injury was so severe that it was very difficult to hold back the tears. At this time, Dietrich washed and treated his sister's wound, trying to do it carefully. It turned out to be unbearable, and a couple of tears still fell from the child's eyes. Amidst all this excruciating pain, Anissa was only afraid that her brother's aura would turn red. But Dietrich simply looked at his sister with his coal black eyes and remained silent, showing no emotion. With everything happening, the baby didn't even notice how she ended up falling asleep. Anissa woke up in her room, although she didn't remember how she ended up there. Looking at her hand, the girl realized that her brother had been able to complete his treatment yesterday. And now the wound didn't hurt so much, so the young man's help proved useful. But now the heroine was only thinking about the fact that the whole situation turned out to be much worse. Although Dietrich was one of the candidates, he was treated no better than his sister. The servants had small salaries, so they took it out on the children. Anissa knew it was all wrong, but she couldn't do anything. And then the little girl heard someone enter her room, after which she began to smile. It turned out that Lancel had come to feed the child milk. It became known that the servant did not even know about what happened to the baby's hand. However, the man didn't care, so he didn't pay attention to it. This angered the heroine, because Lancel was supposed to take proper care of her. And then the servant once again began to think that Lady Camilla died because of Anissa. The aura around the man instantly turned black, and he began to scold the little girl. Then the girl started waving her hands, trying to drive the dark smoke away from you. In this way, the heroine managed to clear the aura of the man who was angry with her. The black colour gradually began to disappear, which made Anissa very happy. The girl was amazed that it actually worked in the end. The little girl understood that now she would have to constantly clean Lancel. Meanwhile, the man gave Anissa milk, which was cold this time too. The servant admitted that he had hoped for an improvement in the situation in the palace when Dietrich became a candidate. But nothing changed, so now Lancel was thinking about quitting. The man then expressed his surprise that Dietrich was still alive, even though no one was feeding him. Upon hearing this, the little girl even choked on her milk as she was so surprised. And the servant was still arguing that there were never even breadcrumbs in the kitchen. This made Anissa very angry, because she did not understand how it was possible not to feed a 6-year-old child. Lancel, meanwhile, was wondering how Dietrich was still alive without food. Although the heroine always tried to be smiling, now she could not contain her displeasure. The servant, having fed Anissa, calmly left her room, leaving her alone again. According to the girl, in such a house even the main character would become a villain. Even though the little girl had already seen a lot, she was still shocked by the fact that a 6-year-old child was being starved. And then the heroine realized that no one would take care of Dietrich except her. So Anissa decided that she would bring her brother food herself. But then the girl saw a mirror and decided that she wanted to look in it. The heroine wanted to know what she looked like because Lancel constantly called her ugly. So the little girl decided that she should try to reach the mirror. Although Anissa couldn't walk yet, she was able to crawl behind the mirror quite dexterously. The girl even managed to touch the mirror, so everything almost worked out. In the end, the little girl was able to throw off the mirror without breaking it. The heroine was so worried that her appearance would actually turn out to be ugly that her hands even shook. But instead, Anissa saw in the mirror a cute child who certainly couldn't be called ugly. The girl assumed that Lancel simply had problems with his eyes. But the biological mother, upon seeing her daughter, immediately concluded that she was cursed. It's all because of the colour of the eyes, because in the south they believe that red eyes are a sign of a curse. But in the north there are a lot of people with red eyes, so they are treated normally. Because of this peculiarity, people in the south are even subject to exile, especially the Euclids, who have bad relations with the Lagranges. But the baby didn't care about the colour of her eyes, because it turned out that she was very sweet and beautiful. And then the girl remembered that she had originally intended to feed Dietrich. With a long journey ahead, Anissa decided to recharge herself a little too. But the heroine didn't eat everything because she wanted there to be some left for her brother too. After this, the girl hurried to look for Dietrich. Fortunately, it was not so difficult. Seeing the young man, the little girl began to speak loudly so that he would pay attention to her. The garden was quiet and deserted, so the boy quickly noticed his sister. The girl immediately wanted to sit down next to Dietrich, but she wasn't very successful, and the large amount of dust got in the way. Then the young man immediately decided to help the little girl because he saw that she couldn't cope. After which the boy carefully sat his younger sister down next to him. Dietrich became curious as to why Anissa had come to this place in the first place. However, the girl could not say anything, even though she tried to pronounce the word brother. But the young man still didn't understand what the little girl was trying to say. Then the heroine decided that she needed to act and handed her brother the bottle. But even after this, Dietrich did not guess what exactly his sister wanted from him. The girl hoped that the boy would understand the meaning of her actions, so for some time she continued to hold the bottle. In the end, Anissa decided to show her brother by personal example what should be done. And only then did the boy realize why the baby was holding out milk to him. But as it turned out, Dietrich didn't want to drink it, which he immediately said. Be that as it may, the heroine did not want to retreat because she had spent so much effort to get here. That's why the little girl continued to insist that the young man try anyway. The girl didn't understand why her brother refused to eat at all. So Anissa decided to take matters into her own hands and feed Dietrich. The heroine smiled radiantly, thinking that now she would please the young man. The bottle was almost at the boy's mouth, but he didn't share his sister's joy. And then Dietrich shouted that he didn't want milk and then pushed the girl's hand away. Of course, Anissa couldn't hold the bottle after that, and it fell. The little girl didn't expect this because she was sure that her brother would like it. And then the young man realized that he had been too harsh with the little child. But Dietrich did not apologize, but only said more softly that he did not want milk. After which the heroine silently turned around, looking at the fallen bottle. Anissa thought her brother could at least pretend to drink milk. Besides, the girl was upset because she had to sweat a lot to get into this garden. The little girl was very upset by what was happening, and tears started flowing from her eyes. Although the heroine tried not to cry, the resentment was too strong. And then suddenly Dietrich approached his sister and then pulled her towards him. Then the young man noticed that Anissa was crying, although she tried to hide it. The guy was very surprised that the girl was upset over such a trifle. But the little girl couldn't do anything about her emotions because she was offended. Anissa even stopped smiling, although she always tried to do so in front of her brother. Dietrich, seeing that his sister was sad, nevertheless took the bottle from her hands. And then the young man began to drink milk, hoping that it would cheer up the child. In the end, the boy managed to drink everything, leaving the bottle empty. When everything was done, Dietrich asked his sister if she was now satisfied. The girl, not expecting such an act from her brother, froze in surprise. So the young man had to stand for a while with the bottle in his hands, waiting for it to be taken away. Then the little girl came to her senses and stretched out her hands in response to take her thing back. The girl was very happy because she managed to feed her brother at least a little. After which it became a tradition among the boys because the heroine began to constantly bring Dietrich milk. Thus a whole month passed, and during this time the young man no longer refused food. However, during this time, only Anissa visited her brother, and he never came to her. And today, Lancel left the little girl some cookies, so she hurried to get them. However, the sweetness was too high, so it was difficult to reach. Eventually, the girl reached the cookie, but it fell and crumbled. But the heroine wasn't upset about this, but simply quickly put everything back together. As soon as everything was ready, the little girl dusted off her hands and got ready to go to her brother. Anissa quietly opened the door, looking around so that no one would notice her. It was still a bit difficult for the child to walk, so for now he had to crawl. But then another child, whom she had not noticed before, stood in the heroine's way. And this, unfortunately, turned out not to be Dietrich, but his future faithful assistant. The little girl was very surprised to see Yurik in the Dahlia Palace because he shouldn't be there. It turned out that the young man was aware that Anissa was Dietrich's sister. Meanwhile, the boy looked at the girl, trying to understand where she was going with such luggage. Then the heroine started screaming, causing a red aura to appear around Yurik. Because of this, Anissa still had to calm down so as not to anger the guy. After which, the young man decided to take the little girl hostage in order to later threaten Dietrich. The heroine thought that this was not Yurik's best plan because her brother didn't care about her. So Anissa just relaxed, letting the boy carry her. The young man, noticing this, was surprised that the little child was not afraid of him. In response to this, the little girl simply smiled, showing that she did not feel fear. Then Yurik thought that the girl he had captured was strange. After which, Anissa decided to treat the young man to some cookies, which she still carried with her. The heroine understood that she and this boy would soon be on the same side, so she wanted to get along with him. Although Yurik was surprised by such an unexpected gift, he still accepted it. Then the young man's aura immediately changed to a friendly one because he was very happy with the treat. At this time, Anissa was closely watching the behavior of her kidnapper. But then the boy suddenly froze in place, thinking about something. And then Yurik spat out the cookie, which he had been very happy about before. The heroine was very angry at how the young man treated the food, of which there was not much anyway. It turned out that the boy thought that the treat for him was poisoned. The boy believed that no one would treat him just like that, which meant that there was something wrong with the cookies. And then the little girl, to prove her innocence, began looking for cookies for herself. After which Anissa herself also bit into the sweet, showing that there was no poison. But even this didn't calm Yurik down, because he began to think that the little girl herself was eating poisoned cookies. The boy began to ask the girl to spit out the poison as quickly as possible. However, instead, the heroine calmly swallowed the cookie because she understood that everything was fine with him. Seeing this, Yurik began to say that something would happen to Anissa now because she ate poison. Then the young man decided that this was all Dietrich's plan and that he wanted to poison both him and his sister. After which the boy decided to save the baby by turning her upside down. But then Yurik stopped because suddenly someone's hand grabbed him by the shoulder. It turned out that it was Dietrich, who wanted to know what his friend was doing. And then the young man finally let the child go to the floor because he was scared. Anissa was happy about this because being down there naked wasn't exactly pleasant. After which Yurik told the boy who came that his sister had swallowed poison. After hearing this, Dietrich decided that it was his friend who poisoned the girl. And then the heroine saw how a coal-black aura began to appear around her brother. Then Yurik started shouting that he was not a coward to attack small children. But Dietrich did not understand why the young man fed his sister poison. The guy tried to prove that Anissa poisoned herself and that he was not to blame. However, the boy who came was not going to believe the one who seemed to have harmed his sister. Yurik insisted that his friend, who poisoned the cookies, was to blame for everything. This made Dietrich laugh because he did not put poison in his friend's drink. Anissa knew the situation was getting tense and decided to run away. Meanwhile, Yurik was thinking about the fact that the young man who had arrived, as it turned out, had not added poison to the treat. The guy became curious as to why the girl had treated him if it wasn't someone's plan. Then the boys turned their attention to the little girl, not letting her run away. So Anissa had no choice but to smile kindly. And only after this did Yurik realize that the girl had just given him the treat. The cookies weren't poisoned by anyone, but the young man realized this only now. In this house, everyone was a competitor for each other, so no one believed in good deeds. So Yurik became curious as to why Anissa treated him to cookies. However, the heroine could not say that she simply wanted to become friends with her brother's future subordinate. Besides, even if the little girl tried to explain everything, no one would understand her. And since words wouldn't help in this situation, the girl decided to just act. After which Anissa rose to her feet and walked towards the young man, stretching out her arms. And as soon as the heroine was able to reach Yurik, she hugged him tightly. Although the young man did not push the little girl away, he still shuddered after her actions. Then Anissa noticed that a green aura had formed around the guy. At first, the girl did not understand what this color meant because she saw it for the first time. At the same time, Yurik began to apologize to the little girl, who was accused without reason. The boy couldn't even imagine that someone would treat him to cookies just like that. And then Anissa realized that there was an aura of gratitude hovering around the young man. The guy continued to ask the girl for forgiveness, explaining his behavior by saying that he simply misunderstood everything. Yurik understood that there were not many cookies anyway, because the palace in which the brother and sister lived was poor. So the young man felt sorry that he spat out the food, of which there was little anyway. Then the little girl nodded to show that she was not angry at all. Thanks to this situation, the heroine was able to get to know the personality of her brother's future assistant better. But then Dietrich intervened in the dialogue, wondering what Yurik was doing in this palace, after which the young man took his sister from the guest and left her at a distance from him. It turned out that the boy had come to challenge Dietrich again to a game in which he had failed to win the last time. Then the future main villain reminded the guest that last time he ended up buried in the ground. Dietrich was completely confident that this time nothing would change. That's why the young man was very surprised by Yurik's decision to get involved in this again. However, the guest decided that since he did not die, it was a draw, not his defeat. So the boy once again decided to challenge Dietrich without fear of the consequences. But the future villain didn't understand why he should waste his power on some weaklings. But Yurik still continued to insist that Dietrich fight him. And no matter how much the young man tried to hit his friend, he always managed to dodge. And then Dietrich tripped the guest, and he didn't have time to get around it. In the end, Yurik couldn't stand and fell, while his opponent stood nearby and looked at him. After which the future main villain began to drive the young man away, calling him Euclid. And this greatly angered the guest, who immediately began to prove that he was Lagrange. However, Dietrich wasn't going to listen to this, because in reality he didn't care. The main thing is that Yurik simply doesn't touch his friend, then he will behave calmly. But the guest was not going to calm down, because he did not like being looked down upon. The young man wanted to strike Dietrich, but was unable to because of the shadow that appeared under his feet. The black fog was tangible, so it captured the boy and lifted him above the ground. All this was the power of Dietrich, who didn't even strain himself much, using his shadow. Anissa watched all this, and day by day she became more and more amazed by her brother's strength. Although the future villain was still a child, his magic was already frightening. Dietrich was so powerful that he could easily lift a person with his abilities. And while Yurik was hanging upside down, the girl thought about why he was so at odds with her brother. After all, the heroine clearly remembered that the boys had a good relationship in the novel. And this completely contradicted the fact that now the acquaintances were supposedly going to kill each other. Then the little girl decided to take matters into her own hands and calm her older brother down. The girl understood that Yurik could not be killed because in the future he would become a faithful assistant. So Anissa did everything she could to get Dietrich to turn his attention to her. In the end, the heroine was able to get her brother to let his rival go, after which the shadow that the young man had summoned began to gradually disappear. Before this, Yurik pointed out to an acquaintance that his mother was a slave, ridiculing it. So Dietrich decided to reveal that Derek's mother was also a slave. And that's why Yurik needs to behave more respectfully, otherwise he'll have big problems. Looking at the guest, Anissa thought he was about to cry, but he held on. Then the little girl turned to her brother, but he had already started to walk away from her. Then the heroine forgot about Yurik and hurried to catch up with Dietrich, who was not going to wait for her. However, no matter how hard Anissa tried, catching up with the young man proved too difficult. The girl understood that the guy walked quickly, so she would not be able to keep up with him. So the heroine decided that the best solution would be to try to call her brother. But, as usual, instead of normal words, the child could only utter something incomprehensible. Because of this, the little girl became completely upset, resigned to the fact that she couldn't do anything. Although it was hard to believe, the girl still managed to attract her brother's attention. However, only now did the heroine feel that she needed to change her diaper. Because of this, Anissa even forgot about her plan because she began to feel very embarrassed. At first, Dietrich did not understand why his sister's behavior changed so quickly. Meanwhile, the girl hoped that her brother wouldn't notice anything and would simply let her go. But things didn't go according to plan because the young man realized that Anissa needed a diaper change. Dietrich decided to do it himself. However, Anissa began to protest. Although the girl was against it, in reality she had no choice. And then the young man noticed that the little girl had something tied around her shoulder. Dietrich immediately guessed that his sister was bringing him milk once again. But the little girl was offended by her brother's behavior, so she shook her head. However, the young man did not believe it, because there were no other options for what Anissa wanted to do. And then Dietrich remembered that Yurik had received cookies from his sister. The boy also wanted to get a treat, so he asked his sister about it. Then the heroine began to look for the cookies where she had hidden them. But, as it turned out, the little girl only had crumbs left of the sweets. So it quickly became clear that Dietrich would not get a treat this time. Anissa guessed that she must have dropped all the cookies while Ulrich was holding her upside down. However, all was not lost because the girl still had milk. So the heroine started shaking the bottle in front of the guy, trying to treat him. But because the baby was waving the milk too hard, it slipped out of her hands. At that very moment, the bottle opened and its contents spilled out. It all happened too quickly for Anissa to do anything about it. Unfortunately for the heroine, the bottle flew straight at her brother, spilling water on him. After this, the girl immediately began to wonder how she could get out of this situation. However, it seemed that nothing could be fixed, which meant that the end was near. So the little girl was already prepared to receive punishment for her mistake. Anissa didn't understand what would happen next, and that made the situation even more frightening. But contrary to all expectations, Dietrich did nothing to harm his sister. Instead, the young man began to wipe up the spilled milk without saying a word. The little girl watched her brother's actions closely, waiting to see what would happen next. And then the guy said that at such moments the guilty one should apologize. This gave the heroine hope that the future main villain did not intend to harm her. The boy, in turn, continued to wait for an apology, but then realized that it was in vain. But even here, Dietrich did not get angry because he saw that his sister did not do it on purpose. So the young man was not offended by Anissa, which made her very happy because she was preparing for the worst end. And then the future villain noticed that Ulrich, for some reason, was still in the castle. After which the offended guest replied that he was just about to leave. The heroine was still surprised by how the boys treated each other, knowing their future. And the young man, after hearing the remark directed at him, began to run away from the castle. In any case, Anissa was glad that nothing serious happened. Ulrich was very valuable, because in the future he was supposed to become Dietrich's right hand. So the girl tried to prevent anything from happening to her brother's assistant. After which, the little girl began to think that Dietrich was not what she had expected. Thus, a large number of days passed in the Lagrange castle. Anissa grew very quickly, and after some time she was able to move independently. Although the girl didn't know exactly how old she was already celebrating her second spring with the Lagranges. When the girl wanted to eat, she went to the servant with this request. Then the man handed the baby milk, but she thought that it was no longer food for her. But Lancel didn't care, so he just went to bed peacefully, without thinking about anything. Because of this, the child still had to drink milk, although it did not satisfy his hunger. After which, Anissa tried to wake up the servant, but she was unsuccessful. Then the little girl had no choice but to go to the kitchen herself. Having arrived at the right place, the heroine immediately looked around, checking that no one was there. The girl made sure that everything was clean and then smelled a delicious aroma. It turned out that this was the smell of the chocolates that Lancel had hidden for himself. The heroine was hungry, so she decided that she needed to eat at least something. So Anissa started eating the chocolate, hoping no one would catch her. However, the little girl's hopes were not destined to come true because she heard a creaking sound. It turned out that at that moment a maid entered the kitchen and immediately noticed the child. The maid was very angry at what she saw in front of her, so Janine immediately rushed to Anissa to stop her. It then became clear that these sweets were the property of the maid. Thus, the heroine discovered that she was mistaken when she thought that the chocolate belonged to Lancel. The woman, in turn, began to snatch the candy from the baby's hands. The maid shouted that you can't eat other people's food, but Anissa argued that she hadn't eaten it. It was clear that the girl was lying, so Janine asked her to tell the truth and give her the jar. In the end, the maid was still able to snatch the chocolate from the child's hands, but not very carefully. Because of this, all the chocolates fell on the floor and no one managed to catch them. All the candies that fell were already spoiled, which made the woman very upset. But the heroine did not consider herself guilty because she understood that she was just a child who wanted to eat. Anissa was hungry, so she thought the servants should have fed her. So the baby tried to reach for the chocolate again to get at least a little food. However, Janine saw this and hit the child on the hand, not wanting to share the candy. The blow was strong enough that Anissa began to cry. The maid was shocked that Lancel had not taught the girl manners. But the little girl didn't care about the comments anymore because she was very sad. The woman didn't understand why the one who turned out to be a thief was also crying, after which Janine noted that she was very irritated by Anissa's behavior. The maid believed that the girl should be punished for her misdeed, even without taking into account the fact that there was a reason for it. Then the heroine tried to explain to the woman that she just wanted to eat. Then the maid emphasized that she didn't care at all, so there was no point in complaining. But the little girl didn't want to let the chance to eat pass her by so easily, so she grabbed Janine by her dress. And when the maid stopped, Anissa began to repeat again that she was hungry. The heroine hoped that the woman would take pity on her and treat her to some chocolate. The girl still didn't speak perfectly, so it was impossible to pronounce some words, but it was still possible to understand. So the maid listened to Anissa's complaints, but then said that she didn't care. Janine suggested that the little girl be like her brother and eat wild animals in the forest. After this, the maid left, leaving the hungry child without any food. Then the heroine tried to calm down and decided that she could pick fruit in the garden. The girl hoped that at this time of year at least something edible would grow. However, after walking around the garden, Anissa realized that she had apparently hoped in vain. Although it was spring, not a single flower had yet blossomed, let alone fruit. Once again, the heroine was shocked by the terrible conditions prepared for the children. And then the little girl, walking in the garden, suddenly noticed her older brother. Overjoyed, Anissa immediately began calling Dietrich so that he could see her too. The girl immediately sat down next to the young man, telling him how much she missed him. After which the heroine noted that the boy, although not much, had gained weight. But then the little girl's attention switched to the meat that Dietrich was frying. Anissa was already so hungry that she simply couldn't take her eyes off the food. The young man immediately noticed that his sister began to drool over his catch. And then the heroine was finally able to pull herself together so as not to anger her brother. But it was too late, because Dietrich already realized what was happening. The boy felt sorry for Anissa, so he immediately offered her to eat what he had prepared. At first, the little girl was very surprised, not expecting this from the future villain. And as soon as the heroine came to her senses, she began to tell her brother to eat himself. Then Dietrich did not argue with the girl and began to do what she said. The young man began to eat calmly, while Anissa looked at the food with a hungry look. The boy wasn't worried about his sister because she herself refused food. So the heroine could only scold herself for not taking the offered meat. The girl was very upset that, due to her own fault, she had missed the opportunity to eat. By this time, the young man had completely run out of the food he had prepared. After which, Dietrich noticed that his sister had some kind of bruise on her cheek. Then the little girl admitted that the maid had pinched her, but did not add why exactly. Even though the guy ate all the food, Anissa couldn't be upset with him even after that. The young man, in turn, became interested in why Janine had harmed the child in the first place. So the girl had to admit that she had tried to eat the maid's candy. After which the little girl said that because of her, several chocolate bars had also scattered. After listening to his sister, Dietrich, without saying anything, stood up and headed somewhere. Anissa immediately followed the young man, asking him along the way where he was going. But the future villain replied that he had decided to leave the garden for the palace. At this time, the young man thought that the child's hair looked like cotton candy. The heroine, in turn, expressed a desire to go with her brother. However, the boy asked the girl to stay in the garden for now and not go anywhere. Dietrich promised that he would return soon, asking his sister to wait for him. Anissa obeyed the young man, so he was able to calmly head to the palace alone. The young man immediately went to the maid, and a black aura began to hover around him. All this time, the guy kept the thought in his head that it was impossible to kill servants. But that didn't stop Dietrich from forcing his way into Janine's room. The woman, seeing what her ward had done, began to scream loudly. However, the young man could no longer be stopped, and he used magic to grab the maid by the throat. Dietrich shared that he never cared that the servants lined their pockets with Lagrange's money. The boy also didn't care that Janine always looked down on him. But the fact that the servants were starving the young man's sister made him very angry. Although Dietrich found Anissa annoying, he didn't want her to starve to death. Meanwhile, the girl herself continued to sit in the garden, waiting for her brother. Thus evening came, and the young man still did not appear, although he had promised. In the end, the heroine couldn't take it anymore, and decided that she had no strength to wait any longer. By this time, Anissa was already very cold, and her hunger had become even stronger. The girl, upset at her brother, went to the castle to at least warm up, after which it turned out that a surprise in the form of food was waiting for the baby at home. The heroine was very happy that she would finally be able to eat something other than milk. So the little girl began to thank Lancel because she was no longer hungry. As she ate the bread, Anissa understood why Yurik was so grateful for the cookie. The girl was also very happy that she could now bring her brother more food. So the next day, the heroine immediately went to Dietrich. However, this time the young man unexpectedly said that he did not want to drink milk. Anissa was upset that the hungry boy was too hard to please, but the little girl was not discouraged because she also had cookies in stock. So if Dietrich doesn't want milk, then let him at least eat some sweets. The boy immediately became curious about where his sister got the cookies in the first place. And then Anissa proudly admitted that she had stolen the treat for the young man. Naturally, Dietrich was a little surprised by this action of a small child. But the little girl shone even brighter after confessing to her crime. After which the boy said that he would still take the milk and let his sister eat the rest. Anissa didn't even have time to say anything. The bottle was empty so quickly. The heroine was very happy because she was finally able to please Dietrich. And then the girl remembered that her brother was destined to become a villain in the future. The heroine hoped that her good deeds would help her avoid her brother's wrath in the future. I wanted to believe that even in the role of the main villain, Dietrich would treat his sister well. Otherwise, all the efforts Anissa put in will be wasted. When all the milk had been drunk, the baby decided to go back to her home. However, the girl did not have time to leave because her brother called out to her, asking her to stop. This had never happened before, so Anissa was very surprised by the young man's behavior. After which Dietrich asked his younger sister to come to him. Then the little girl, without thinking twice, ran curiously towards the young man. However, the girl was very angry that the boy did not address her by name. But Dietrich quickly distracted the heroine from these thoughts, holding out something to her in his hand. It turned out that it was a cherry that the young man wanted to treat Anissa to. But the boy wasn't sure that his sister could eat that anymore. Then the little girl calmed her brother, saying that there was nothing dangerous for her in the berries. So the girl took the cherry and then thanked Dietrich for it. The heroine was very happy about this because there was hope that she had become friends with the future villain. After which Anissa ate the berry and really liked it because it's rare to get to try something like that. The young man, in turn, carefully observed his sister's behavior. And then Dietrich concluded that the girl really did look like a chicken. Besides, the boy was interested in whether Anissa wanted to eat more berries. To which the little girl replied that she wouldn't mind a couple more cherries. Hearing this, the young man gave his sister all the berries that he had hidden. The girl thought that cherries were the best thing she had ever eaten in her life. The heroine was so happy that she even started to cry, which her brother immediately noticed. So Anissa had to explain that she wasn't crying, she was just very happy. Before this, the baby had only eaten bread and milk, so the sweet and sour taste delighted her. The girl was very grateful to her brother for sharing the berries with her. And then Dietrich asked his sister if all children were like her. The heroine understood perfectly well that it would be difficult to find such an obedient child as her. But Anissa didn't have time to answer because her brother said that all the other children except her were dead. And so the young man could not find out whether his sister's behavior was normal or not. The girl decided to pretend that she had not heard anything, after which she tried to climb onto the bed. However, the little girl didn't succeed and simply slid to the floor. The child could not sit up properly because the bed was too high. At first, Dietrich simply watched his sister's efforts, but then he decided to help her. The young man picked up the girl and then carefully sat her down next to him. Everything happened so suddenly that Anissa didn't even understand what had happened at first. Every action of Dietrich gave the heroine hope that he began to treat her well, after which the little girl independently sat down closer to her brother. The girl understood that now her chances of surviving in this world had increased. However, after this, Anissa noticed that her brother moved away from her. But the heroine had no intention of retreating, approaching Dietrich again. Then the boy began to say that it was time for his sister to leave. But instead, Anissa began to cling to the young man even more tightly, shouting about how grateful she was to him. The girl found it surprising that the future villain had saved the cherries to give them to her. It felt very strange that a bad child was doing good deeds. Meanwhile, the young man continued to try to drive Anissa away, but she did not leave. The little girl tried to act as sweet as possible to melt the heart of the future villain. And then Dietrich asked his sister if she wanted to eat some more cherries, since she liked them so much. To which the girl, as expected, responded with consent, because the berries really turned out to be very tasty. It turned out that the boy still had some cherries, which he gave to Anissa. The young man admitted that he took the berries from another palace, hoping that they were not poisoned. These words really scared the little girl, because, as it turned out, the cherries could have been poisoned. Moreover, the heroine was angered by the fact that, although Dietrich was not sure about these berries, he still gave them to his sister. Although Anissa didn't say anything, she was scolding her brother harshly in her thoughts. The heirs could kill each other without any problem, since only the killing of servants was forbidden in the house. So it really was possible that someone had poisoned the berries. Therefore, the heroine began to wait for the moment when something would happen to her. And while the little girl was crying from fear, the boy began to laugh at this, after which the young man reassured his sister, saying that everything was actually fine, because all the candidates knew that Dietrich was not afraid of any poison. And then the heroine remembered that, indeed, her brother was resistant to poison. The reason for this was that Camilla poisoned her child every day. It was a strange family tradition that made one feel sick just reading it. But then all the little girl's thoughts were driven away by a voice that came from the door. Anissa looked up to see Marilyn, the new maid who had replaced Janine. Anissa loved the girl who came very much, so she immediately ran to her. Marilyn was kind and caring, so the child couldn't help but like her. The maid immediately began to praise the girl, saying how beautiful and sweet she was. Dietrich watched all this from his bed, without saying anything. And while the maid was chatting sweetly with Anissa, the young man did not take his eyes off them. The girl quickly felt a cold gaze on herself and turned around to make sure of it. However, as soon as the little girl looked in her brother's direction, he turned away. So the heroine decided that she had simply imagined it, because the boy's aura remained the same. At this time, Marilyn was talking about how she was going to take Anissa to her room. The girl did not resist this, smiling amiably at the maid. The new maid was the first adult to whom the heroine became attached. So Anissa was very happy that Marilyn came to replace Janine, who just disappeared at one point. Before leaving, the little girl said goodbye to her brother. However, he didn't even look in her direction. Although the girl continued to smile, she was thinking at that time that Dietrich was ill-mannered. Both Marilyn and Anissa kept trying to talk to the young man, but to no avail. So the guests left Dietrich's room without hearing anything from him. Then the heroine was once again convinced that Marilyn was the only friendly person in this mansion. A few days later, while the young man was walking in the garden, he suddenly heard his sister's voice. The little girl ran to Dietrich, wanting to tell him very important news. But instead of listening to Anissa, her brother started trying to correct her pronunciation. The girl was still too young to pronounce the words correctly, so she still couldn't do it. Although Dietrich wanted his sister to pronounce his name correctly, this was not possible in the near future. So Anissa gave up trying to speak because she needed to know something. As it turned out, the little girl hadn't seen Marilyn for a long time, and this upset her. The heroine hoped that her brother knew where the maid had suddenly disappeared to. The girl really missed her maid, with whom she had a good time together. Marilyn read stories to the little girl and played with dolls with her, something no one else did. Moreover, the maid told Anissa many interesting stories that were useful for understanding this world. And as it turned out, Marilyn was simply sent to another palace for a short time. This information upset the little girl very much, so she noticeably dejected. The young man didn't even know when the maid would return, and this made him even sadder. Seeing Anissa's change of mood, Dietrich asked her not to cry, after which the boy became interested in why his sister liked Marilyn so much. Then the heroine told that the maid spent a lot of time walking with her. From what he heard, Dietrich concluded that the baby needed more toys. And then the young man waved his hand and a huge purple circle appeared on the ground. The girl immediately realized that her brother was currently calling someone. When the wind and noise died down, the heroine finally saw who exactly had come to visit them. It was a huge creature that immediately bowed to Dietrich. Then the heroine realized that it was the demon king named Baal, who was encountered in the novel. The monster immediately asked the young man why exactly he had been summoned. And then the boy replied that the demon should play with his sister because she was bored. Anissa was horrified to hear this because she clearly didn't want to spend time with the monster. In addition, Baal's aura emanated an unpleasant smell of death, which was also not particularly pleasing. But no matter how much the girl repeated that she was not bored, no one listened to her. The monster began to approach the little girl, which only made her more afraid. And then the Demon King conjured up something that vaguely resembled a toy. Then the heroine not only felt scared, but also confused. Baal began shaking the conjured rattles, trying to create a melody. Although Anissa didn't want to admit it, she began to like the demon's performance. In the end, the little girl couldn't hold back and started laughing at the monster, which pleased Dietrich. However, the fun didn't last long because the heroine soon learned that Marilyn had been fired. This upset Anissa greatly, and she decided to find out more about what had happened. However, Lancel, who was the only one who could know anything, said nothing. Then the little girl couldn't stand it and insulted the servant, calling him stupid. The girl was very upset that the only person who treated her well was fired. After being insulted, the man admitted that he had forgotten to order food. So today, Anissa will have to starve because there was no other way. The little girl, already accustomed to bread, was shocked by these words. The girl herself could not do anything, so she decided to go to her brother. As she left the room, the heroine wondered why Lancel hadn't been fired. After all, Marilyn treated the girl well, but in the end they left the one who was starving her. Approaching Dietrich's room, the little girl first knocked on the door. However, no one let Anissa in, so she decided to go in on her own. Having run into the room, the heroine immediately felt a terrible cold. And all because Dietrich, for some reason, opened all the windows wide open. The girl didn't understand this because there was no coal or firewood in the mansion to keep warm. At first, the little girl thought that her brother had gone somewhere, but then she heard some sounds. So Anissa hurried to the young man's bed, hoping to find him there. The heroine was right, because Dietrich really did end up in bed. The girl immediately noticed that her brother was sick, after which she covered him with a blanket. Only after this did the young man notice that a guest had come into his room. And immediately the boy told Anissa to move away from him. Besides, Dietrich didn't understand why they covered him with a blanket, since he was already hot. But nothing could stop the heroine, because she wanted to help her brother. After which the young man admitted that he had a severe headache and therefore asked not to be disturbed. Instead, Anissa went to look for medicine, but instead found water for washing. The girl was happy with this find, so she immediately took the rag. Although the little girl didn't quite manage to wring the fabric out, she still placed it on her brother's lap. The heroine understood perfectly well that this would help Dietrich feel better. However, the young man himself was not particularly happy with these actions, so he immediately removed the rag, after which the boy threw the handkerchief as far as his strength allowed. But Anissa wasn't upset by this, so she immediately put the wet fabric back in place. Although Dietrich was indignant, his sister understood that her help would benefit him. The girl had no medicine, so she simply lay down with her brother to look after him. Besides, it was cold in the room, so the heroine wanted to warm her brother this way. Anissa also advised the young man to hug himself to feel even warmer. In the end, the boy couldn't take it anymore and jumped out of bed, even though he felt bad. And all this was done in order to get my sister away from me. The girl was too noisy, which her brother did not like at all. After which the girl was transferred to a chair that stood under the door. But this did not offend the heroine because she understood that Dietrich was now in a very bad state. So the little girl decided that from now on she would try not to make noise around her brother. After some time, Anissa tried to go back in, but she was unable to do so. Dietrich closed the door so that the girl would not bother him, but then he still felt sorry for her. Looking out of the room, the young man first of all reminded her that his sister had promised not to make noise. After which the boy saw that there were different branches lying next to the child. So Dietrich became curious as to why the heroine had brought all this along. As it turned out, all this time Anissa was collecting firewood for her brother. After all, it was cold in the young man's room, so his sister wanted to warm him up. This decision on the part of the girl initially surprised Dietrich greatly. But in the end, the boy resigned himself and allowed Anissa to do whatever she wanted. Therefore, the happy little girl immediately ran into her older brother's room. After which the eventful day finally came to an end, giving way to night. Dietrich had been asleep for a long time, tired because of his illness, which was very exhausting. But this time, the young man's little sister also stayed overnight with him, not wanting to leave him alone. However, the future villain was not destined to sleep peacefully until the morning. After all, the boy was awakened by the noise that he suddenly heard outside the window, after which Dietrich saw a small dagger flying towards him. Luckily, the young man reacted quickly and summoned a shadow that stopped the weapon. The boy took control of the dagger and could now move it as he wished. And then the boy noticed the one who used this weapon. Dietrich was strong, so some stranger didn't scare him too much, so the young man calmly threw the dagger back at its owner, wounding him. Although it was easy to deal with the criminal, the sleep was still disturbed, after which Dietrich looked at his sister, who in turn was sleeping soundly. The young man felt sorry for Anissa because she had spent the whole day looking for Marilyn, who, in fact, had been sent to kill her. The boy didn't understand why the girl liked an ordinary maid more than a demon capable of anything. Besides, Dietrich was curious why the child was so drawn to him. Although the guy thought that Anissa was trying to survive under his protection, he couldn't believe that she had come up with this idea herself. However, the future villain did not care about his younger sister's intentions. After all, the young man knew that the final task for the candidate for succession required the sacrifice of the most important thing. To become a duke, one had to leave one's humanity behind and care only about one's strength. The demon Asmodeus wanted Lagrange to become a man like him. But to do this, Derek had to sacrifice one of his friends or family members. It was all quite complicated, and Dietrich understood this perfectly well. The future villain was very worried that he would not have something important. And then suddenly a demon appeared, who said that then the young man would end up the same as Roderick. Although Roderick was much more suitable than Derek, he failed the test because he had nothing to sacrifice. So Dietrich's younger sister appeared at a very opportune time. For this reason, the future villain had to cherish Anissa. The boy hoped that in this way he would be able to deceive Derek. But the demon was confident that his master could deceive even Asmodeus. However, Baal was still confused by one thing, and he decided to talk about it. As it turned out, the monster was afraid that Dietrich was holding Anissa too close to him. But the young man calmed the demon, saying that his life was much more important to him. So Baal can rest assured that his master will not give up on his plan. After all, Dietrich had planned to use his sister as a victim from the very beginning. The young man wanted to become the heir, so he thought through everything to achieve his goal. As it turned out, the future villain had planned to use Anissa as a victim from the very beginning. While the boy was talking about this, he looked intently at his sister, after which the young man felt something prick in his heart. Dietrich decided that this pain appeared because someone had poisoned him. The future villain should not forget that he always needs to be careful. The next day, the demon again had to spend time with the girl. But Anissa was no longer afraid of Baal, but on the contrary, she happily walked with him. Besides, the monster brought the baby milk of different flavors, and today it was strawberry. Despite his demonic appearance and foul aura, he was quite good as a nanny. Baal tried to please the girl, constantly asking her if she liked everything. Besides, the monster called Anissa a princess, although she didn't really like it. But Baal believed that since Dietrich was a king, his younger sister should be a princess. The demon explained that he had chosen the future villain as his master. That's why for the monster, Dietrich was a king and the baby was a princess. Anissa was amazed that Baal chose a little boy to serve him, after which the heroine told the demon that he seemed to really like her brother. The creature did not particularly argue with this statement, but simply switched the child's attention. Baal knew that the maid read books to Anissa, so he decided to do the same. And then the demon sat the girl on his knee, which turned out to be quite soft, after which the monster asked the little girl which book she would like to read first. Even though the heroine already knew all these stories, she was still able to choose one. Baal was about to read the book he had chosen, but was interrupted by a knock on the door. Someone wanted to enter the baby's room, which the demon wasn't particularly happy about, after which the monster immediately disappeared because he didn't want anyone to see him. But Anissa didn't pay much attention to it because she heard a familiar voice. As it turned out, Marilyn was standing behind the door, and she continued to know the child. This surprised the heroine a little because she knew that the maid had been fired. However, the fact that the woman was walking towards the baby right now spoke to the contrary. As soon as Marilyn entered the room, the smile disappeared from the girl's face. And all because there was a very strange and unpleasant aura hovering around the maid. So the heroine became frightened and began to move away from the woman who was extending her hand to her. The maid demanded that Anissa come to her right now. But the girl felt that something was wrong, so she didn't want to do it. Then Marilyn said that the baby had nothing to be afraid of, so she could come up to her with confidence. However, the maid's words did not sound at all convincing to the heroine, so the woman finally couldn't take it anymore and simply grabbed the child by the hand. Anissa immediately started calling her brother for help, but no one came. Moreover, Marilyn immediately rushed to calm the baby down so that she wouldn't scream. And then the heroine noticed that the maid's gaze seemed clouded. The woman looked like a doll whose movements were controlled by someone. So Anissa decided that she needed to try to cleanse the maid's aura. The girl hoped that this way she could help the unfortunate Marilyn. Something started to happen, after which the maid began to scream loudly. The woman was in so much pain that she even unconsciously grabbed the child. This made Anissa feel uncomfortable too, but she still didn't stop. After which the heroine noticed that the dark aura gradually began to disappear. The little girl was pleased that there was meaning in her actions, so she began to try even harder. And in the end, the mysterious shadow completely left the exhausted maid. However, Anissa still didn't understand why Marilyn was suffering so much. So the girl called the maid, wanting to know what was happening to her. The woman, in turn, looked at the child and began to cry loudly. After this, the maid began to scold herself, repeating that she had done something terrible. The heroine, looking at this, did not understand at all what had happened. And then Anissa decided not to ask questions, but simply try to calm Marilyn down. But then, completely unexpectedly, the maid was thrown away from the baby. This really scared the girl because her favorite maid could get hurt. So the heroine immediately decided to run towards the woman, but she was stopped. This was done by Dietrich, who later noted that Marilyn did not seem to value her life. Seeing the young man, the maid began to cry even harder, trying to say something. The boy, in turn, hastened to lift his sister into his arms. But Anissa wasn't particularly happy about this because her brother came when his help was no longer needed. After which the girl was distracted from her thoughts because she heard the maid begin to talk about Leatrix's service. Leatrice was Ulrich's biological mother, Derek's first wife, and the deputy head of the family. And, as it now turns out, Marilyn had been serving this woman all this time. All this meant that the maid was an ordinary spy and nothing more. The heroine was shocked by this information because she thought that the maid really loved her. However, Anissa was confused by the fact that she did not notice Marilyn's deceitful aura. And then the little girl saw that her brother began to use his abilities. The girl decided that Dietrich was going to kill the maid, so she began to try to stop him. Even though Marilyn was a spy, the heroine didn't want anything to happen to her. Anissa was really bothering the young man, so he put her on the floor to calmly finish what he had planned. The boy also ordered his sister to go as far away as possible. However, instead, the girl covered the maid with her body, protecting her. Then Dietrich asked the little girl again to move away and not get in the way. But the heroine decided that she would try to save the maid until the very end. In the end, Marilyn couldn't take it anymore and moved away from the girl, fearing that she would be harmed. The woman began to ask the young man not to touch Anissa, who simply did not understand anything. After which the maid confessed that she was controlled by Lady Leatrix with the help of a demon. And in fact, Marilyn really loves Anissa and wants to protect her. It turned out that Leatrice was using the demon Veronica, her daughter. But Dietrich then began to be confused by how an ordinary woman could get rid of such a strong spell. The maid assumed that her mistress had removed her magic herself, although it was unclear why. However, the young man did not believe it, because such a simple release from the spell sounded implausible. Anissa, meanwhile, wondered whether she should admit that it was she who saved the maid. In the end, the little girl decided to just try to negotiate with her brother for now. So the girl told Dietrich that she would hate him if he did anything to Marilyn. Anissa will never forgive a young man if he hurts the one she loves very much. Also, the heroine began to shout that she would tell everyone about Baal. After which, the maid herself also began to beg for mercy, promising that she would not report anything more to her mistress. Marilyn hoped that Dietrich would still give her a second chance and keep her alive. The maid fell to the ground, begging for forgiveness, and then Anissa ran to her. The young man, in turn, simply watched what was happening. The girl then began to try to calm Marilyn down so that she would stop crying. And then, unexpectedly, Dietrich turned around, saying that he agreed to leave the maid alive. After this, the maid hugged Anissa gratefully, and tears continued to fall from her eyes. The woman began to apologize to the little girl because she was ashamed of all her actions. The heroine believed that she saved Marilyn only because she began to threaten to expose Baal. But that didn't matter anymore because the most important thing was that the maid was okay. But Dietrich at this time was thinking about everything he had recently seen and heard. The young man found it very funny that Anissa wanted to scare him with her hatred. Also, the boy did not understand what his sister found so good in an ordinary maid. And it wasn't actually the threats that stopped Dietrich, but rather his usual reluctance to deal with the spy. But the future villain didn't care about the girl, because she wasn't even a person to him, much less a family member. Anissa was just a victim who would help her pass one test. After this, time passed calmly, and so the little girl was already 3 years old. Baal was still keeping an eye on the girl, and now he was pleased with how skillfully she handled the sword. Anissa liked it too, so she assumed she had a real talent for it. After which the demon suggested that when the heroine raises the sword, there should be no holes in her defense. The girl remembered every word the monster said, immediately listening to his advice. It turned out that Baal was a wonderful mentor, so Anissa learned quickly. Once all the material had been mastered, the demon suggested consolidating everything in practice. And then the little girl immediately attacked the monster, after which he fell, screaming about his defeat. But the girl saw that she didn't even have time to touch Baal, so he was deceiving her. This offended Anissa, who really wanted to show off her skills. And the demon, in turn, continued to prove that he really tried. The monster began to assure the little girl that he was even sweating because of how difficult the fight had been. After which Baal admitted that he would gladly fight Anissa for real, but her brother might not like it. That is why the demon tried to behave with the baby as carefully as possible. This made the heroine even more angry, so she dropped the sword and began to leave. Meanwhile, the monster tried to convince the girl that they needed to try to get along. But Anissa didn't want to listen to Baal anymore, so she simply left him. On the way home, the little girl tried to understand what Dietrich could have said to the demon that made him not want to fight her. And then the heroine saw that a hole had appeared in the fence, which was definitely not there before. Naturally, Anissa immediately became interested in where this passage led. The girl understood that she couldn't tell anyone about the hole because no one would definitely let her see what was there. So the little girl secretly slipped through the fence, wanting to find out what was on the other side. The heroine thought that nothing terrible would happen and she would still remain in the garden. As soon as Anissa got through the fence, she saw beautiful flowers. After which, the little girl noticed a fountain that was completely covered in gold. The girl was amazed at how rich everything in this place looked. But then it dawned on the heroine whose garden could look so beautiful. Most likely this subway belonged to those who brainwashed Marilyn. So Anissa realized that she needed to get out of there quickly before anyone noticed her. While running away, the little girl heard some screams, but they were not addressed to her. From the sounds, it became clear that someone was being beaten, but this did not bother the girl much. But then the offenders started shouting something about blue eyes that they would have to gouge out. And then Anissa became interested in what was happening behind the fence. The boys told their victim that he was a disgrace to Leatrice's palace. After all, the one who was beaten up couldn't even hit Dietrich before that. Every word confirmed more and more that Anissa knew the young man who had been attacked. But the girl still wanted to make sure, and looking out she saw the beaten Yurik. After which the heroine waited until the offenders went as far away as possible. As soon as everything became calm, Anissa hurried to the guy lying on the ground. The girl hadn't seen Yurik for a long time, so the first thing she was surprised at was how much he had grown. And then the little girl sat down next to the young man, asking how much pain he was in. The heroine assumed that the boy had already forgotten her, so she introduced herself. But, contrary to expectations, Yurik quickly recognized the girl as Dietrich's younger sister. Then the young man became curious about what Anissa was doing in this garden. So the girl had to point to the passage in the fence from which she came, after which Yurik grabbed the little girl by the hand, saying that she shouldn't be there. The guy wanted Anissa to return to her territory as quickly as possible. After all, the young man understood that the girl could be harmed if they saw her. Yurik explained to the child that Leatrice's children simply hated the Georgina Palace. Then Anissa wondered if the young man hated her and her brother as much as everyone else. This question took the boy by surprise, so he simply fell silent. The heroine quickly realized that she needed to change the topic since her interlocutor was feeling so awkward. So instead, Anissa asked the young man why he was being beaten since he was not from the Georgin Palace. The young man explained that this was all happening because of the blue color of his eyes. After which the little girl silently pulled Yurik closer to her to examine him. And in the end, the girl concluded that the boy had quite beautiful eyes. The heroine didn't care about the color because she believed that it didn't make her appearance any worse. To prove this, Anissa led her interlocutor to the fountain and he didn't even resist. The little girl showed Yurik his reflection in the water, explaining that he was very handsome. So the girl didn't understand how anyone could dislike someone for this. However, this did not convince the young man because his eyes were similar to the eyes of their rivals from the south. The Lagrange children hate the Southerners and nothing can be done about it. And then the little girl heard that a third person had joined their conversation. When Dietrich appeared, he immediately asked his sister what she was doing there. The first thing the young man thought about was that it was Yurik who brought Anissa to this garden, but the girl immediately rushed to explain that she came here herself. The heroine was simply bored, and that is why she sneaked into foreign territory. However, Dietrich couldn't understand how his sister could ever become bored. After all, Baal was always next to the girl and could be used as a toy. Instead of answering, the little girl decided to talk about something else, asking where her brother got the scar on his cheek. Anissa promised the young man that she would punish anyone who dared to offend Dietrich. The girl was confident in her abilities because she was able to learn to control the sword. So the heroine decided that she would study even harder in order to protect her brother later. In response to this, the future villain sighed and then picked up Anissa in his arms to carry her home. Because of this, Yurik began to think that the rumor that Dietrich had acquired something valuable might be true. But in reality, almost no one believed that the boy cared about his sister. In any case, Yurik decided that he needed to tell his mother about this immediately. The young man also thought about trying to subjugate Dietrich using his weakness. While the boy was thinking about this, he noticed Anissa waving goodbye to him. This touched Yurik, so he decided to put all his plans on hold. And during this time, the guy decided to make sure that the girl was really dear to Dietrich. Anissa, in turn, began to think that in 3 years, she had only seen the Georgina Palace and Leatrice's garden. So the girl decided to ask the maid if she could go to Vaughan Castle. Marilyn knew there were no rules against it, so she agreed to fulfill the child's request. But the little girl couldn't go there alone, so the maid kept her company. The woman just happened to be going to Vaughan Castle on business, so she needed to leave for a while. So Marilyn asked the girl to sit on the bench and wait for her. After all, Vaughan Castle was much larger than Georgina Palace, and Anissa did not want to walk around it alone. However, as soon as the maid left, the heroine immediately decided to leave her place. But the little girl couldn't go far because she heard some screams. So the girl decided to take a sneak peek to see what was going on there. At this time, someone's voice was still repeating that someone had dared to rush at Alfonso. And as soon as Anissa came closer, she realized that they were scolding Dietrich. At this time, a man was shouting, trying to prove to the young man that he meant nothing. The heroine did not expect to meet her brother in this castle, and especially at such a moment. After which the stranger pushed the young man so hard that he fell. The man was very angry, so he continued to scold Dietrich even after that. The unknown person was twirling a key in his hands, and at first Anissa didn't understand what it was for. But then it became noticeable that the future villain's hands were chained. The man advised the boy to think about his behavior and then left. When Dietrich was left alone, his sister immediately ran to meet him. The young man immediately asked the little girl how she got to this place. Anissa had already started to tell her story, but then she fell silent, seeing the seal on her brother's handcuffs. The heroine knew that the seal was only used on prisoners with strong magical abilities. And Dietrich, as it turned out, was forced to wear chains during all classes. The girl wondered if it hurt to wear the seal, to which the boy replied that it wasn't very painful. Moreover, it became known that the man who left took the key with him, so that the young man could only be released the next day. And then Anissa realized that her brother hadn't looked at her once since she had approached. The heroine assumed that the young man was ashamed to look at her because she had seen him being beaten. Although Dietrich denied everything his sister said, it was clear that she was not mistaken. However, there was nothing wrong with a small child losing a fight to an adult. But the young man was not convinced because he was different from the other children. Dietrich has a complicated life, in which there is no room for a completely ordinary childhood. Hearing these words of the young man, the sister began to stroke his head, wanting to encourage him. After which Anissa promised that she would definitely master the sword to protect her brother. The heroine wanted Dietrich to at least sometimes feel like the child he is. But then someone called Anissa, and at that very moment the boy removed her hand from his head. As it turned out, it was Marilyn, who looked very lost. The maid did not find the baby in the right place and was very scared for her. But the woman felt calmer when she saw that the girl had been with her brother the whole time. However, the maid believed that Dietrich should also be more careful because it was easy to get lost in these places. But there was no need to worry about the young man because he was not as careless as Marilyn, who had lost her baby. Then the young man left, and the heroine continued to think about how he allowed the servant to beat him and did nothing about it. After the incident, Dietrich continued to attend swordsmanship classes. But now, once a week, the boy is summoned to Vaughan Castle, after which he returns sealed. Even Baal could not remove these handcuffs because the seal on them was with divine power. The girl felt hurt by this, so she began calling the monster useless. Then Dietrich asked his sister not to take out her anger on an innocent creature, after which Anissa decided to ask the young man how these handcuffs could be removed. Only the key that belonged to the man who had previously beaten the boy could remove this seal. Dietrich asked his sister to hide immediately if she saw this man. After all, that stranger was Derek's trusted knight and also Leatrix's younger brother. But the heroine still did not want to come to terms with what was happening to her brother. With the young man's strength being drained, it became more difficult for him to deal with the assassins who were sent every night. So the little girl decided to think carefully, hoping that she could somehow help Dietrich. It was known that Leon Euler, Leatrice's younger brother, was a rather important supporting character. And then Anissa remembered that Leon's father, Marcus Euler, was at odds with Derek. After which the girl thought that the enemy of an enemy could become a great friend. But everything needed to be thought through carefully to ensure the plan was perfect. A few days later, as soon as the servant arrived, Anissa immediately asked him where Marilyn was. It turned out that someone had recently called the maid, so she went out. And when the little girl asked who exactly needed a maid, it turned out to be Leon Euler. After which the heroine asked the servant to take her to the knight as well. Lancel was hesitant at first, so the girl started shouting that it was an order. So the man had no choice but to do what was required of him. The servant was not surprised by Anissa's request because he thought that she simply really wanted to see Marilyn. Lancel had no idea what plans had been swirling around in the child's head all this time. And then the little girl and the man accompanying her came across those they were looking for. After which, Anissa heard the knight calling the maid to marry him, but she refused. Leon did not understand why Marilyn did not want to agree to marriage, because he considered himself ideal. And besides, the maid wasn't getting any younger, so it was unclear why she was wasting time. Besides, the knight wanted the maid to return to work for Leatrix. After all, what's the point of wasting time on a slave's children when you could be in more comfortable conditions? The man was sure that it would be the Euler family that would choose the heir, and of course it would be Alfonso. So it would be much more profitable for Marilyn to serve the future duke. The knight believed that he too had power because he had the key to the vault containing the sealing stone. So the entire Lagrange family was currently in the hands of the Eulers. After which Leon promised that he would not even take concubines if Marilyn agreed to become his wife. The man felt that the maid's life would be much better with him by her side. At some point, Anissa couldn't take it anymore and was about to swear, but Lancel stopped her. By this time, the knight had already begun to leave, recommending that the maid think carefully. The little girl really didn't like the way the man kept acting around Marilyn, but she couldn't do anything. When Leon had gone far enough, Lancel immediately ran to help his colleague. Meanwhile, the girl looked at the man, whose aura made it clear that he was planning to do something bad. This was the little girl's chance to spy on her opponent and perhaps discover his weakness. So Anissa followed the knight as he went deep into the forest. There was a hole in the brick fence, and the man approached it. There was also someone on the other side of the fence, and they started talking. Leon said that he brought the sealing stone and then asked something about money. This artifact was of great help to the Lagrange family, especially in their dealings with demons. And then it turned out that the knight was going to sell such an important thing. The man received a lot of money for the sealing stone, which made him very happy. Having collected the reward, Leon calmly walked back, as if nothing had happened. The knight had no idea that someone had been watching him all this time. Although the Lagrange family was one of the cruelest, on a short winter night, when the sun had already set, a banquet was still held to drive away the cold. Of course, Dietrich also got ready for this event and picked out a great outfit for it. But the young man could not leave calmly because he was stopped and grabbed by the arm. As it turned out, Anissa also wanted to go to the banquet, hoping that her brother would take her with him. The little girl explained her decision by saying that she wanted to try winter pudding. In fact, the heroine was going to go to accuse the knight. However, Dietrich believed that nothing good would come from the girl's presence at the banquet. Although the young man did not want to take his sister with him, she was not going to agree to it so easily. So in the end, the young man could not resist and agreed to take Anissa to the banquet. But the girl will not be able to leave her brother's side even for a step, so as not to get into trouble. And once again, the heroine was convinced that Dietrich was not at all like a villain. After all, the young man gave in to Anissa and took her with him to the event. As soon as the boys entered the palace, the girl was surprised at how huge it was. They didn't have to remain unnoticed for long because Derek immediately noticed the guests. And then it turned out that the man had not seen his daughter for so long that he had forgotten about her existence. But the little girl wasn't offended, so she continued to smile kindly. After which another person intervened in the dialogue who wanted to meet Camilla's daughter. It was an older man who immediately noted that girls were rare for the Lagranges, so he was very glad to meet them. And then the guests started to discuss how they usually get headaches in this area, but this time everything was fine. And then Anissa was convinced that she had not decided in vain to cleanse the environment. But the girl didn't think about it for long, because the purpose of her visit was different. When the little girl found Leon in the crowd, she realized that he was looking at Marilyn. The girl felt uncomfortable that the man allowed himself to do this even after he had been refused. So Anissa decided to take revenge on the knight for his behavior, and Derek would help her with this. It was known that the Duke liked to be feared, and the heroine decided to take advantage of this. If the little girl pretends that she is more afraid of someone than the head of the family, then this will definitely attract his attention. And as soon as Anissa began to tremble, looking at Leon, Derek immediately noticed it. The man quickly became curious about what was happening to his daughter. So the Duke followed the child's gaze, quickly guessing where it was directed. Derek immediately asked Anissa what it was about the night that scared her so much. The chief believed that the girl should not have been afraid of a member of the Lagrange family. Then the little girl confessed that Leon had spoken to her as if he were much more terrible than the Duke. Naturally, these words did not go unnoticed, and Derek immediately wanted to figure it out. After which Anissa added that the knight told Marilyn all this, and she could confirm it. The little girl also remembered the phrase about the Lagrange family being in the hands of the Oilers. Leon realized that he was in big trouble, so he began to deny the above. But then the girl decided to tell that the knight gave someone a precious stone in exchange for money. Derek immediately assumed that the little girl was talking about the sealing stone, but the knight only continued shouting that the child was lying and that this had never happened. Here Leatrice intervened in the dispute and asked her brother to leave the palace, after which the woman said that there was no point in ruining the banquet, so Leon would receive his punishment after it. Now it would be better for the knight to simply return the keys to his sister and leave the event. When the evening ended, the boys went home, where they were already getting ready for bed, and then it turned out that Dietrich did not like the girl's behavior. After all, the girl promised that she would behave well at the banquet, but she lied. But the heroine still believed that she did the right thing because Leon was a bad person. Anissa did not want to put up with the fact that the knight was offending both her brother and her maid. Dietrich then noted that the baby had become too attached to Marilyn. The young man was sure that the girl's naivety and gullibility would turn into something bad in the future. But the heroine was not going to change her mind, even though the young man thought it could be dangerous. No matter how much Anissa was scared, she still wanted to protect Marilyn and Dietrich. Besides, the girl knew for sure that the maid treated her well. The little girl couldn't talk about her gift, so she explained her confidence in it as a simple premonition. But this did not convince Dietrich, so he was still sure that one day his sister would be deceived because of her naivety. However, the heroine was not afraid of this because everything had been fine until now. The boy didn't want to argue anymore, so he simply headed towards his bed. After which the young man called his sister to him, allowing her to sleep with him. This made Anissa very happy because it made her feel both warmer and safer at the same time. Although winter was already leaving, the temperature continued to remain at its lowest. It was very cold in the estate, so the boys had to warm themselves. The next day, Anissa and Marilyn went for a walk outside, and there the little girl promised that she would become a warrior and protect the maid. Then the woman said that it was she who should protect the child and not the other way around. But Anissa didn't think so because she understood that Marilyn was weak. But the girl was unable to finish speaking because she was interrupted by a stranger who suddenly appeared next to her. It turned out that it was the grandfather whom the heroine had seen before at the banquet. The man immediately asked the little girl if she knew who he was. At first the girl bowed politely in greeting, but then admitted that she had not. Then the old man said that his name was Joseph Louis Euclid, and this amazed the heroine. As it turned out, the guest's younger brother was the former head of the Euclid house. However, Joseph cut his relative's throat and then fled to the Lagranges. And the man was very interested in the fact that Anissa had red eyes. As it turned out, the color of the eyes was important to the old man because he was looking for the savior of the North from legends. The heroine had already heard about this from the novel, so she quickly understood what it was about. The Lagranges worship demons, and the Euclids the sun god, but there are also those who believe in the prophet Eris. The main prophecy said that a child with blue eyes would save the North. From the novel, Anissa remembered something about Saint Charlotte, the heroine who would save Dietrich. But it was unclear why the old man was looking for the person he needed among the Lagranges. After which, Joseph began to talk about how he heard that Camilla had failed and the child had died. Then Anissa got scared that her grandfather knew too much, so she said that it was all strange. Euclid immediately hastened to apologize for annoying them with his nonsense. The old man admitted that when he was around the little girl, he simply felt some kind of clarity, and that's why he began to tell all sorts of stories. Anissa knew that the older man knew too much, so she had to be careful. If Joseph finds out about the girl's ability, her identity will quickly be revealed. However, even though the heroine should have been more careful, she still wanted to listen to the grandfather's stories. After all, one could learn a lot of new and useful things from all these tales. So after some time, Anissa herself went to visit the old man. Joseph was glad that he had a listener, so he immediately let the girl in. Grandpa said that he worshipped Eris, who had the ability to influence people. Anissa was interested in this goddess because she herself was blessed by her. Therefore, the little girl tried to find out as much as possible about the one who had similar abilities. Joseph ended up in the north because Eris could break demon curses, and he wanted to learn more about it. The man also admitted that he was trying to create a demon using the powers of the sacred tree. Although Eris was weaker than the sun god, Gera, when she was still human, she fought monsters. Anissa wanted to hear more about the creation of demons. However, the old man changed the subject. Joseph decided to show the girl a sacred tree that does not grow in the northern lands. This tree was very valuable, so the little girl wanted to take it for herself. The old man quickly noticed that the heroine liked the plant he showed her. So Grandpa decided to give Anissa a gift, since she still had several more of these trees. Without the power of Eris, the seedling will not grow, however, everyone feels better near it. However, Joseph was worried that the tree would not go well with Dietrich. And all because Baal was the only demon who was not affected by Eris's power. Then it became clear why Anissa had such a hard time reading her brother's aura. At first, the girl simply thought that Dietrich was simply insensitive. So now the heroine was thinking that the young man was actually not so bad. The boy had many good qualities, so Anissa didn't believe that he would become a villain. But then all thoughts disappeared, because the girl saw her brother surrounded by dead bodies. Then the little girl was so scared that she couldn't even move. The young man heard rustling sounds and began to turn towards the unknown noise. After which Dietrich saw that Anissa was standing next to him, and this surprised him. The little girl even fell down out of fear, but still tried to pretend that everything was fine. The boy immediately hurried to his sister because it was already too late for walks. Dietrich did not understand what the girl was doing in the forest at such a dangerous time. Anissa, for her part, did not explain anything, so her brother quickly realized that she had gone to see Joseph. So the young man suggested to the little girl that next time she invite him with her and not go alone. Being next to her brother, the fear quickly went away, so the heroine relaxed in his arms. The girl understood that it was impossible to remain kind in a world where everyone was trying to kill you. The most important thing is that Dietrich treated his sister well, and the rest is unimportant. Thus, 5 years of Anissa and her brother's life together in the palace passed. Everything was quite calm until one day the young man returned terribly injured. The little girl immediately tried to find out what was going on, but Dietrich said nothing. The heroine had never seen her brother in such a terrible state before, so she became scared. Anissa didn't know what she should do now to help the young man. There was so much blood that it seemed as if the boy was about to die. Something needed to be done quickly, so the girl decided to run after Marilyn. On the way to the maid, the heroine kept wondering who could have harmed Dietrich so badly. Anissa remembered that her brother had a bad cut on his left eye, and then the little girl realized who exactly could have committed such a terrible act. The girl remembered that there was a moment in the novel when Derek wanted to kill his son. Because the heroine was deep in thought, she didn't notice how she crashed into something. When Anissa looked up, she saw a man looking for her brother. It was a great surprise for the little girl to meet someone in their usually empty estate. Moreover, the girl quickly noticed that a scarlet aura was hovering around the head of the family. So Anissa quickly realized that the man had come to kill Dietrich. The heroine remembered that, according to the novel, Derek was in love with Leatrice at that moment. So, for the sake of his beloved, the man decided to help Alfonso. Although Dietrich survived in the book, he was now too weak to fight. That's why the girl was afraid that this time the young man wouldn't be able to cope without her help. At that very moment, Anissa called out to Bale, realizing that his powers would be useful to her. The heroine immediately asked the demon to send her straight to her brother. Then the monster, without question, used his magic to move the child. Baal was strong, so Anissa fell on Dietrich in just a moment. After this, the girl started screaming for the young man to get out of there as quickly as possible. The little girl quickly told her brother that Derek was coming after him, so they needed to run. Without thinking twice, Dietrich called Baal to help him in the battle. However, the demon understood that in his current situation, the young man would not win. The little girl was angered by the monster's thoughts, so she began to scold him. And then Baal came up with the idea that Anissa could be used as a go-between. After which Dietrich suggested moving someone else into the room, because Derek would not dare to commit murder in front of witnesses. And at that very moment, another young man appeared in front of the guys, who did not expect this at all. The bewildered guy was immediately surrounded by the gazes of the rest of those present. The little girl immediately rushed to greet the guest, but did not have time because the Duke was already very close. So the demon quickly grabbed the baby and disappeared with her, so that no one would see them again. At this time, Dietrich just stood silently and waited for what would happen next. And as soon as the boys were left alone, their father immediately burst into the room. Derek's negative aura had grown even stronger by this time, showing his hatred towards his own child. And even in Urich's presence, the man's thirst for blood did not subside at all. Moreover, the Duke was very angry when he saw someone in the room who should not be there. So first Derek said that Urich had greatly disappointed him, and then he turned his attention to the second boy. The man pretended to see his son's injuries for the first time, and even began to show his concern. After which the Duke admitted that he would like to discuss something with Dietrich, and therefore asked his second son to leave. The girl understood that if Urich left now, it would be the end for her beloved brother. So Anissa ran out of her hiding place and started demanding that the fair-haired young man take a walk with her. The heroine grabbed Urich tightly, wanting to keep him inside the room. Derek didn't expect this turn of events, so he just stood there in silence for a moment. But as soon as the man came to his senses, he immediately grabbed the baby, pulling her away from Urich. The Duke was greatly surprised by the fact that Anissa was not at all like her mother Camilla. After which Derek began to talk about how the girl could then be sold into slavery. And then the man will at least be able to compensate for the losses that occurred because of Camilla. However, Dietrich began to say that his sister could not be sold because she had abilities. But this didn't stop Derek, because in this case, Anissa could fetch an even larger sum. Slaves with abilities were always very expensive, like Dietrich's mother. Although these words angered the young man, he did not show it outwardly and only smiled. This reaction surprised Derek, so he began to look at his son even more closely. After which Dietrich noted that such an act by a man would disgrace the entire Lagrange family. After all, it seemed surprising that someone with such a majestic surname would be someone's slave. This means that the family's reputation as rulers of the North will be tarnished. These words convinced Derek, so he immediately threw the child away from himself. After which the man asked the little girl what her name was, because he still didn't know it. And as soon as Anissa introduced herself, the Duke left, having first said that it was time for the children to go to bed. Thus the boys were left alone in the room, which could not but please them. And when the trouble was over, the girl immediately threw herself into her brother's arms. Although the heroine acted confidently, in reality she was very scared. Even Dietrich noticed how much his little sister was shaking. So the young man began to calm the little girl, repeating to her that everything was fine now. At that moment, the guy noticed that caring for Anissa had become a habit. Things of this kind had already become everyday life for Dietrich, and this surprised him. But then the girl interrupted all her brother's thoughts because she wanted to know if he was okay. And at that moment, the boy suddenly felt something strange. Dietrich had never felt anything like this before, and this change did not please him. The young man felt his heart begin to beat faster, although he usually remained cool in any situation. The reason for this was Anissa, who was supposed to be just part of the plan, but became something more. After this event, Yurik returned home, but the separation from the girl was not so long, because very soon the heroine again made her way into foreign territory. The young man didn't want the baby to be in danger, so he climbed over the fence himself. The boy didn't like at all that Anissa was risking her life for all sorts of stupid things. And as soon as Yurik had spoken, the girl asked him where Dietrich had gone. However, the young man himself knew no more than the heroine, so he could not help in any way. This upset Anissa because it turned out that she had come all this way in vain. So the upset girl couldn't stand it and said that Yurik was a real weakling who didn't want to do anything. The little girl also added that the young man seemed to have only beautiful eyes. But the guy didn't want to agree with this statement, so he started arguing. Suddenly, Anissa felt someone lifting her up, and it turned out to be Dietrich. First of all, the young man who came told his sister not to play with Yurik anymore. And then the fair-haired boy had a chance to express his dissatisfaction with the fact that he was forcibly teleported. Anissa was watching what was happening at this time, but she did not quite understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Yurik began trying to figure out where his offender got the ability to mix people up. But instead of answering, Dietrich only mocked, assuming that the young man would then run to complain about him. The girl didn't like the way her brother talked to Yurik, so she decided to divert attention to herself. The heroine wanted to find out from Dietrich where he had come from. Although the young man seemed evil, his aura remained just a grey mist. Then the boy himself asked his younger sister why she was looking for him, after which Dietrich asked that Anissa never do that again. The young man believed that his sister was already old enough, so now she should take care of herself. And then the future villain simply left, leaving his sister with Yurik. Anissa felt very hurt that her brother decided to leave her after everything she had done for him. Besides, the girl was only 5 years old, which was not such a great age. In the end, the heroine decided that she was not going to back down and would continue to try to improve her relationship with her brother. However, several days passed, and Anissa did not even see a hair of Dietrich, and even Baal did not help. The demon only continued to repeat that he himself did not know where his master was. And no matter how much the girl tried, she could not find Dietrich. So Anissa decided that since her brother didn't want to spend time with her, she would go to Yurik. After which the heroine crossed the border once again, even though she was forbidden to do so. And unfortunately, this time it wasn't her friend who was waiting for the girl at the fence. When Anissa saw who had caught her, she knew she was in big trouble. The boy the heroine met also quickly guessed who exactly had fallen into his hands. The meeting was definitely unpleasant because Dietrich's sister met Alfonso. The young man immediately began to study the unexpected guest who had entered his territory. As it turned out, news had already reached other families that Anissa had no abilities. It was therefore surprising that Dietrich constantly defended his sister since she was of no use to him. But then the girl switched her attention from her brother, saying that she wanted to meet Yurik. And then Alfonso became curious about why Anissa wanted to see the young man. However, the heroine did not want to say another word to the boy who treated her so terribly. So the girl continued to remain silent, not paying attention to all the threats that were being thrown at her. This infuriated Alfonso so much that he moved from mere words to actions. But Anissa didn't want to let herself be hurt so easily, so she reacted quickly and bit her opponent's finger. This act made the young man even more angry, wanting to punish his offender. Alfonso started screaming that the little girl had not been taught any manners at all, and that her brother was to blame for everything. After which the young man began to approach Anissa, and it was clear that he was going to harm her. The little girl understood that she could no longer do anything on her own, and so she began to call her brother. At that very second, some unknown but very powerful explosion occurred. Because of this, Alfonso was thrown a long distance by the wave, which saved the heroine. It immediately seemed that it was Dietrich, however, the aura was not his colour. There was a grey-green colour floating around, and Anissa couldn't figure out who it belonged to. As the dust from the explosion began to settle, the girl was able to see a demon named Amon. But the surprises didn't end there, because Yurik appeared next to the monster. The young man immediately took the heroine in his arms and began to scold her for coming to a dangerous place again. However, the little girl had no intention of making any excuses, but simply wanted to learn more about Amon. To which Yurik replied that this was his personal demon who was helping him. Then Anissa noticed that her friend had never had his own monster before. This surprised the young man because the little girl should not have had such information. But Yurik very quickly forgot about it, deciding that her brother had told the girl everything. After which it turned out that it was Dietrich who gave the demon to Yurik. However, this is not particularly good news, because anyone who makes a contract with a demon will not live long. After all, if a person is not strong enough to control a demon, someone else can take it away, and in return, the previous owner dies. That's why Yurik thinks that he shouldn't give Anissa his monster, because the young man didn't want anything bad to happen to the baby. After which the boy asked Anissa not to worry so much about him and Dietrich. After all, death comes to everyone, so there is no need to be so afraid of it. The heroine was struck by the heavy thoughts that entered the head of a very small child. Although Anissa was surrounded only by children, they all already behaved like adults and thought the same way. But then Yurik changed the subject of the conversation, noting that now he began to understand Dietrich, and all because, as it turned out, protecting Anissa was quite a hassle. But the heroine was sure that her brother never looked after her properly. However, it was thanks to Dietrich that almost everyone was afraid to harm Anissa, although she did not notice it. And then, after thinking a little, the little girl asked who was protecting her brother. Unfortunately, Yurik didn't know the answer to this question, so he couldn't say anything. Anissa was very upset that her brother, at such a young age, was already relying only on himself. At the same time, Dietrich, walking in the garden, saw something in the sky. And it was Veronica Lagrange, the only candidate for heir who was adopted, and the poison cultivated by Leatrix. It was Veronica who was the person who controlled Marilyn under Leatrix's orders. It turned out that the girl had overheard the conversation between Anissa and Yurik, and she was very amused by the question of who would protect Dietrich. So Veronica immediately rushed to tell the young man about it. Dietrich didn't like this at all, so he ordered that Anissa not be touched. However, the young man was not yet the heir, so he could not give instructions to anyone yet. But in any case, Veronica was quite intrigued by what was happening. The boy had no desire to continue this dialogue, so he told his interlocutor to get lost. Dietrich held himself quite confidently, even though the person in front of him was a man of great strength. And as soon as Veronica realized that she would not receive any useful information, she got ready to fly away. The young man noted to himself that none of Leatrix's children had ever learned to bark. But the girl at this time was thinking about the fact that Dietrich seemed to really care about his sister. After which, Veronica immediately went to Alfonso, wanting to teach him a lesson. So very soon the young man was lying on the ground, his face covered in abrasions and bruises. The boy couldn't defend himself, so all he could do was shout that he was a beloved son and therefore couldn't be hurt. But Veronica didn't care about this because she understood that Alfonso would never become the heir. Although Leatrice had high hopes for her beloved son, he was a weakling. And once Veronica had dealt with her stepbrother, she decided to head to Anissa. The baby, as usual, was in the garden, so it didn't take long to look for her. At first, the girl decided to study Dietrich's sister from afar, wanting to understand what was so special about her. Veronica was sure that she had hidden well, but very soon the child was running towards her. Anissa moved boldly because she thought Baal was watching her. But as soon as the girl saw who exactly was standing behind the tree, she became very scared. Then Veronica hastened to introduce herself to reassure the little girl. And then the heroine was surprised that such a terrible person had such a magical appearance. Even though Anissa knew she was facing a villain, she still tried to be friendly. So the girl began to offer Veronica the bread that Yurik had brought for her. And all because the little girl thought her new friend smelled of sadness. Anissa was sure that if she ate something tasty, her soul would feel better. However, Veronica refused, citing the fact that she did not like bread. Hearing this, the little girl immediately ate all the treats herself, without offering any more. The girl had already started to leave by then, and it was unclear why she had come at all. Anissa was shocked by this meeting because she had never seen such a sad aura before. After some time, Yurik came to the baby, and at the same moment Veronica returned. Although the girl behaved in a friendly manner, the young man was not happy about her arrival. The boy immediately began to hide the baby behind himself, wanting to protect her. But contrary to Yurik's expectations, Anissa was not frightened, but only greeted the newcomer warmly. Then the young man tried to explain to the child that he couldn't trust Veronica, after which the girl admitted that she had no evil plan, and she herself did not know why she had come. But these words could not convince Yurik, who continued to be wary of his half-sister. And at that moment, Anissa intervened in the dialogue, deciding that the guest had come to her to eat together. The heroine saw that Veronica's aura was warm this time, and therefore she was not afraid of her. To show the girl's cruelty, Yurik said that she ended up with the Lagrange family by killing her own family. In this way, the young man wanted to show Anissa that his half-sister could not be trusted. Veronica didn't like that her secret was revealed, so she immediately struck Yurik. After which the girl summoned her demon, which only confirmed the words that she was dangerous. At the same moment, a demon also appeared from the side of the young man, which led to a fierce battle. Both monsters immediately entered into battle, and Yurik began to call Anissa to him. The girl really didn't like what was happening at the moment, so she decided to do something about it. So the heroine stood right between the monsters, stopping their fight. Then Anissa said loudly that she did not want to see anyone fight. It was unclear why all these senseless battles were necessary at all. And since the stepbrother and sister behaved so terribly, they both had to bring the child bread as an apology. If guests come to someone else's palace to fight, then let them bring all kinds of food. After some time, Veronica came to the child again, and this time she really did bring food with her. And it wasn't just bread anymore, but a variety of sweets that immediately interested the girl. Until the very end, the heroine could not believe that all these treats were for her. So Anissa didn't refuse the food, but started eating it right away. And all the sweets turned out to be so delicious that the girl could not resist and cried with joy. At that very moment, Yurik came to visit the child and saw an unusual picture. All this did not please the young man because he immediately thought that his stepsister had brought food with poison. So the boy immediately flew up to Anissa, wanting to stop her from eating the treats. However, the heroine really liked what she was eating, so she had no intention of stopping. No matter how much Yurik tried to convince his friend, she didn't want to listen to him. The next day after the incident, Anissa decided to practice with her sword alone. Although the heroine had not seen Bale for a long time, she was not going to abandon her training. On the way, the girl came across the tree that Joseph gave her, and unfortunately, it never started to grow. To fix this, Anissa began to think that she could make a contract with the Shadow Devil. But thoughts about this quickly disappeared, because next to the tree the heroine noticed one of the treats that she had recently liked so much. And while the girl was picking up the cookie, she saw an eclair next to it. All the sweets were neatly laid out in a row, so Anissa began to think that it was a trap. However, the heroine did not feel any bad aura nearby, so she continued calmly collecting all the treats. Thus the girl reached the huge chocolate fountain, which amazed her the most. And then Veronica appeared next to Anissa, who immediately asked if she had a good surprise. The answer was that the heroine's eyes gradually began to fill with tears of happiness. After this, the girl timidly asked if all this was done for her. And then Veronica replied that she had prepared all this for another person, but since Anissa came first, she could take everything for herself. The heroine understood that this was just an excuse, so she felt very pleased. Then the girl told Anissa not to stand there, but to start eating all the sweets. But instead, the little girl just continued to rejoice at the fact that she now had a lot of sweets. The girl was acting so sweet that even Veronica couldn't help but smile. As a result, the girl herself began to feed Anissa the sweets that she brought. Thus, the heroine ate almost all the treats, which made her very happy. After which the girl realized that she had eaten too much without treating Veronica herself. So Anissa gave her guest the last pudding left. And then the heroine even wondered why Veronica needed to feed her at all. And then the girl admitted that at first she thought about poisoning all these sweets. However, Anissa's death would not have brought Veronica any benefit. And besides, I didn't really want to get involved with Dietrich, who valued his sister. After which Veronica said that Anissa reminded her of a child she once knew. And then the heroine admitted that she had never been afraid that the guest could harm her. The girl didn't even realize that Anissa had been seeing her warm aura all this time. In fact, Veronica was good, which the little girl told her. The heroine also added that she really likes her new acquaintance. Unexpectedly, the guest asked if Anissa loved her more than Dietrich. At first, the girl answered positively, but at that moment she saw her brother standing next to her. After this, Anissa began to say that she was just joking. The heroine hoped that she could fix the situation, but she only made things worse. Besides, Dietrich was not going to listen to his sister's excuses, saying that it did not matter to him. As he spoke, the young man also pulled his hand out of Anissa's weak grip. The future villain behaved very coldly towards his sister, and the reason for this remained a mystery. Instead of paying any attention to the child, Dietrich headed towards the unexpected guest. The young man was not happy that Veronica was appearing on his territory without permission. Noticing the boy's ill temper, the girl immediately began to reassure him that she was not going to harm Anissa. After which Veronica said that she would clean up right away, calling the insects. Having arrived, the little creatures immediately began to carry away everything that belonged to their mistress. This did not make Anissa happy, because they started taking away the sweets that she had not finished. Then Veronica reassured the girl that Dietrich was now of quite a high rank, so they would no longer have to suffer. But as it immediately became clear, these were empty hopes, because the young man refused Derek's help. And since the children still don't have money, Veronica offered them her help. However, Dietrich refused this as well, not wanting to rely on anyone but himself. Besides, the young man was against sweets because they rot teeth. Hearing this, Veronica laughed a little and then went home. And as soon as the girl left, Anissa decided to devote all her attention to her brother. However, the young man continued to ignore the heroine without saying a word to her. The girl began to boast that she had trained hard with the sword, expecting praise. But instead, Dietrich just left without saying what was happening to him. Anissa didn't understand at all why her brother's behavior had changed so much. Thoughts immediately began to pop into my head that the girl had done something wrong. But no reasonable explanation was found, so the day continued to drag on in the same atmosphere. Anissa kept trying to talk to her brother, but he only responded reluctantly in his cold manner. That night, the girl met Dietrich again and immediately hurried to him. The young man tried to get away from the heroine, and then she noticed that he was walking strangely. So the first thing Anissa did was ask her brother if he was hurt. In fact, Dietrich twisted his ankle while dealing with the killers during the day. However, the young man tried to disguise it, and even Derek did not notice his illness. As it turned out, the future villain met with his father, who asked about Anissa. After all, the man saw that his son valued his sister very much, and advised him to show less of his affection, because Derek was convinced that the things we hold dear become our weaknesses. Remembering this conversation, Dietrich looked at Anissa, who in his eyes looked like a fragile autumn leaf. And for some reason, it was the little, weak girl who was able to recognize the pain that the young man was trying to hide. After this, the future villain once again broke free from his sister's arms, trying to get away from her. Moreover, Dietrich asked Anissa not to follow him anymore. But the only thing that was going through the young man's mind was that the girl couldn't even imagine what he had prepared for her. However, the heroine was not going to let her brother go so easily, blocking his path. Anissa said that she was worried about the young man because he was very dear to her. But Dietrich still couldn't understand how he could deserve such treatment. Then the girl began to explain that she considered her brother very sweet and good, but the young man did not want to listen to this, saying that Anissa did not know him at all. After this, Dietrich again attempted to escape, and this time successfully. Finally, Anissa shouted into the void that the young man himself did not know himself. The next day, the girl decided to visit Joseph again. Entering the old man's house, the heroine noticed that he was getting ready to go somewhere. So the first thing Anissa did was ask her grandfather where he wanted to go. Joseph met the little girl with a counter question, asking if she would miss him. To which the heroine confidently replied that yes, of course she would miss him. After which the old man admitted that he had never seen a child who did not fit in so well with the Lagranges. But Anissa was still curious about where Grandpa had decided to go, so she asked the question again. It turned out that Joseph was heading to the forest that was located in the center of Romandolph, which was neutral towards the Lagranges and Euclids. And the reason for this was that the War of the Roses was about to begin. The old man was sure that Dietrich would be able to survive, but Anissa, who did not have the strength, was unlikely to. So Joseph suggested that the heroine go with him to neutral territory. After all, this is the only way the girl will be able to survive the upcoming war. However, Anissa knew that until an heir was chosen, the Lagrange children could not leave the house. That's why the heroine asked her grandfather if he would get into trouble later. But the old man was sure that Derek couldn't kill him so easily, so he wasn't afraid of anything. Even though it sounded good, the girl still chose to stay, hoping that her brother would protect her. The heroine remembered that Anissa from the novel was Dietrich's instrument for observing the movements of Hermann Euclid. And so there was hope that the young man would protect his sister to the last. In any case, sooner or later the day would come when Anissa would leave the Lagrange house, but now was not the right time. For now, the heroine didn't want to leave Dietrich alone because he was just a child who was thrown into this hell. However, Joseph did not believe in Anissa's brother as much as she did. But no matter how much the old man tried to convince the girl, she did not want to leave Dietrich because he was her family. Then the grandfather realized that all his persuasion was useless and resigned himself to the little girl's choice. Joseph couldn't force Anissa to go with him, so he could only support her. But the old man couldn't just leave, so he decided to give the child a small gift. It was a precious stone, and the heroine immediately began to fantasize about how much money she could get for it. However, the old man forbade selling the jewel because in fact it was an ability amplifier. Then, completely unexpectedly, Joseph told someone that it was time to go out. At first, Anissa didn't understand what they were talking about, but then she noticed that they weren't alone in the house. It turned out that Dietrich had been hiding and watching the dialogue the whole time. The young man immediately began to scold his sister for leaving the palace unnecessarily. After this, the boy picked up Anissa in his arms, wanting to take her home. But then Joseph exclaimed that he had seen Dietrich smile for the first time. The girl, not believing her eyes, immediately looked at her little brother. However, the young man, as always, was serious, so Anissa did not understand what the old man was talking about. The disappointed heroine pressed herself against Dietrich again, no longer looking at him. The girl didn't even realize that as soon as her brother's face disappeared from her field of vision, he smiled again. After some time, Anissa decided that she hadn't seen Yurik for a long time, so immediately after that she went to see him. Naturally, the young man didn't like this, because it was still dangerous for the heroine to walk here. But the girl didn't care, so she calmly began to approach her friend. After which Anissa asked Yurik if they could play outside the castle. Although everyone knew that children who were not candidates were not allowed to leave the palace. However, the heroine hoped that this rule could somehow be circumvented. And then Yurik said that he needed to go to the store, hinting that Anissa could go with him. This made the heroine very happy, as she had long wanted to get beyond the castle walls. The young man even had a money bag, which would have made the walk even better. In the end, the friends went to the store, but Yurik was very worried that they did not tell Dietrich about it. But Anissa reassured the boy that her brother was usually very busy, so he wouldn't even notice it. After this, the heroine began to thank Yurik for devoting his time to her. The young man even felt embarrassed by such an amount of praise because he was not used to it. While talking, the boys didn't even notice how they reached the gates that lead into the city. At the very entrance, Yurik had to show the knights some kind of pass, and only then did they let him through. Thus, the friends found themselves in a city where Anissa had never been before. Although the heroine tried to calm Yurik down, in reality she herself was worried that they might get into trouble. However, for now, everything was going well, so the girl could temporarily forget about her fear. And as soon as Anissa was distracted from her thoughts, she immediately froze at what she saw. Around the heroine, there was a real city, through which a large number of people were walking. But Yurik didn't understand what the girl was admiring, because their garden was much more beautiful. But it didn't matter to Anissa, because everything outside was much more interesting. Seeing the heroine's reaction, the young man began to think that he should have brought her here much earlier. And then the girl realized that in the novel, Yurik would never have said such a thing. This means that Anissa's actions began to change the original personalities of the characters. The heroine realized that with her behavior, she could change the course of events. And this gave the girl hope that she would definitely change the plot and survive. The first thing the boys did as soon as they entered the city was go to the store. Yurik immediately found a knife there that he really liked. However, his friend did not appreciate his choice. And while the young man was delightedly talking about his discovery, Anissa tried to carefully move away from him. No matter how kind the boy seemed, he was still Lagrange. That's why the heroine was a little nervous seeing her friend with a weapon. And then Yurik suddenly promised that someday he would teach Anissa how to cut someone's throat. The girl was amazed at how easily the young man spoke about such things. In the end, the boy still bought the sword he liked, which made him very happy. Meanwhile, the heroine dreamed only of how to quickly change the plot and escape from this family. The boys were about to leave, but suddenly they saw a familiar silhouette in the distance. Although the friends weren't entirely sure, they both thought they saw Veronica passing by. So the children didn't try to guess, but simply hurried after their friend. As it turned out, the guys weren't imagining things, because very soon they actually found the girl. At this time, Veronica was telling the stranger that he was mistaken, and therefore she would punish him. After which it became known that this was not just some stranger, but the uncle of the one who was now punishing him. And all because it was this man who told Derek about his niece's abilities. Veronica's mother did not want to give her to the Lagranges, however, it was difficult to resist this family. And the uncle knew about this, but still revealed the secret that his family wanted to keep. Meanwhile, the boys continued to watch this scene, not understanding what was happening. The girl, in turn, began to yell at her uncle, accusing him of being the reason her family perished. The man was a complete scoundrel because he sold his sister's life for money and land. That is why Veronica found this man, wanting to avenge everyone he harmed. After which the girl, without a moment's hesitation, killed her own uncle. At the same time, the aura began to change color from fiery red to light blue. Veronica stopped being angry, and only a strong sadness remained in her soul. Seeing this, Anissa immediately rushed to her friend to console her. Before this, the girl had not noticed that she was being watched, and therefore was very surprised. However, Veronica's confusion did not last long, because she quickly pulled herself together. And now, Anissa already sees in front of her a confident beauty, and not a man shattered into pieces. The girl realized that the children had seen everything that had happened there, so she first tried to justify herself. But then Veronica realized that it was useless to come up with any excuses, because what she had done could not be explained. So the friend simply admitted to Anissa that she was a bad person. The girl just wanted to vent her anger, and so she took the life of her uncle. Therefore, the little girl was very mistaken in thinking that her friend was good. However, Anissa did not show any hostility towards her friend. On the contrary, the heroine began to tell Veronica how much she admired her beauty. The girl understood that at that moment her friend needed support and tried to provide it. Veronica was amazed because even after what she saw, Anissa did not begin to be afraid of her. Although it would seem, right before the child's eyes, the girl killed her own uncle. So expecting fear and disgust towards oneself seemed like a completely reasonable outcome of events. But Anissa thought differently because she understood that her friend had punished a bad person. After which the heroine hugged Veronica, asking her not to be sad anymore. The girl believed that her friend did the right thing by teaching a lesson to the one who hurt her. This man sold his niece and killed her mother, so he deserved this fate. Anissa understood that good people sometimes get angry too, so she didn't blame Veronica for anything. The girl was very grateful to the little girl for these words, because after them she felt better. Yurik stood nearby the whole time, feeling like a third wheel. And as soon as everything calmed down, Veronica asked the girl what she was doing there anyway. Anissa then admitted that she would like to buy a couple of lottery tickets. The young man became very angry at this moment, deciding that they were going to abandon him. The boy felt that Anissa no longer needed him because she got along very well with his sister. But the heroine quickly calmed Yurik down, saying that he should go with them. The girl did not want to leave her friend alone because he was also very dear to her. The young man, of course, still sulked because now not all the attention was being paid to him, but he agreed. So the guys all went together to the casino to buy lottery tickets. However, the plan fell through because a security guard stopped Veronica at the entrance. The man said in a threatening tone that children were not allowed in this place. And then the girl asked the guard if he was really ready to stand in the way of the Lagrange family. Only after this did the young man realize that he had gotten involved with the wrong people. Immediately after this, the guard bowed and invited everyone to come inside. When the guys entered, they immediately started looking for the box office where they could buy tickets. I didn't have to look for long because the treasured window was in the most visible place. As soon as the heroes approached the checkout, a young man appeared from there. Anissa wanted to buy a ticket for herself, so she was lowered to the ground, and then it turned out that the girl did not have enough money to make the cherished purchase. The heroine asked Yurik to give her some more, but he spent all his savings on a dagger. But Anissa had come too far to just give up. So the girl went back to the checkout, even though she knew she was short. After which the little girl began to ask the seller to give her a discount. However, the young man refused the heroine, explaining that this was not an option. Then Anissa tried to turn on all her charm, looking straight into the man's eyes. The girl was so sweet that the seller finally agreed to a discount. The heroine was very happy about this because she had long wanted to buy a lottery ticket. After which Anissa promised that if she won, she would buy Veronica something tasty. The little girl was so happy that her friend couldn't help but smile. And then the girl, in order to please the child even more, decided to buy up all the available tickets. Everything happened so unexpectedly that the children literally froze in their seats. Besides, both children had never seen such a large amount of money in their lives, and Veronica was ready to spend it on an ordinary game. Meanwhile, the seller had already started to take out all the tickets he had, and while Veronica was picking up her purchase, Anissa stood and admired her. After which, the girl handed the bag of tickets she had just purchased to her little friend, just to make her happy. For the Lagrange family, this was mere pennies, but the heroine was still very pleased. Seeing Anissa's admiration, Yurik began to say that he also had a lot of money, he just didn't take it with him. The young man was offended that it was he who brought the girl to the city, but all the applause still went to his sister. The guys were about to leave, but then Anissa noticed something that made her stop. The girl saw other children in the bar, although they were not allowed in according to the rules. So the heroine assumed that these kids were just working in this place. After which, Anissa noticed what exactly had attracted the attention of these children. It was a game where you had to guess under which glass the ball was hidden. At that moment, a young man tried to guess and decided that he should choose the middle glass. But the man's aura was drawn to the left glass, so it was easy for Anissa to understand where exactly the ball was hidden. So the heroine decided to help the children by telling them what to choose. The girl promised the boys that they could safely listen to her. And by trusting Anissa, the children were able to find the ball and win the game. Then the stranger thanked the heroine and then introduced herself, saying that her name was Charlotte. As it turns out, it wasn't just a background character, but Charlotte Valandia, who plays an important role. After all, this girl will become the only positive female heroine in the future. One might think that it was just a coincidence of the name, however, the combination of silver hair and brown eyes was too rare. In the novel, Charlotte was a commoner who was considered a saint due to her powers. And Dietrich spent half of all the Lagrange's wealth to buy this girl the rank of a noblewoman. Charlotte herself was a very modest and kind person throughout the book. Anissa didn't expect to meet the female protagonist so quickly, so the heroine happily started a dialogue with her new acquaintance. And now the girl wondered whether her brother had managed to meet Charlotte by this time. As it turned out, the future saint was not from these places, but came here only because of her power. It's all because Charlotte saw a strange prophecy about this city and decided to check it out. Anissa seemed interested in what her new friend was talking about. And then the saint promised the heroine that she would tell her everything if she guessed the glass with the ball. The girl was confident in herself, so she immediately agreed to the tempting deal. Upon hearing this, the man immediately began moving the glasses to confuse them. As soon as the presenter stopped, Anissa, almost without thinking, said that the ball was on the right, and it immediately became clear that the girl had made the right choice, naming the correct glass. Then the man started the game again, but this time the heroine found the ball. No one knew about Anissa's abilities, so everyone thought she was just very attentive. Although this was cheating, the host himself did not play entirely fairly. Finally, the man proposed a decisive round in which the stakes would be raised fivefold. Of course, Anissa agreed because she wanted to earn as much money as possible. However, this time everything was not as simple as it had been before. And all because now the presenter's aura was not connected to any of the glasses. But Anissa understood perfectly well that this man was unlikely to be able to control his aura. So the heroine immediately guessed that they were simply trying to deceive her. The girl decided to look under the table, and it immediately became clear that the presenter began to get nervous. Seeing the man's reaction, Anissa knew she was on the right track. After which the heroine confidently said that this time the ball was under the tablecloth. The presenter began to deny this, however, it was useless because Anissa provided evidence that she was right. As soon as the girl lifted the tablecloth, everyone immediately saw the ball that was hidden underneath it. After this victory, everyone began to praise Anissa's attentiveness even more. And then the heroine began to demand her winnings. However, the man was not going to give it up. After all, the host believed that it was impossible to win his game, which meant that Anissa was cheating. So instead of the promised money, the girl only received accusations against her. But then the other children reminded the man that it was he who had been cheating everyone out of money. The presenter realized that he was not in the best situation, so he began to get angry. And the swindler blamed all his failures on Anissa, who was the one who uncovered his deception. The man started yelling at the girl, wanting to know what trick she had used. And while the heroine was trying to justify herself, out of the corner of her eye, she looked for Ulrich and Veronica. However, her friends had disappeared somewhere, so no one came to her aid. And Anissa was already beginning to think that no one would help her. But then a large snake appeared out of nowhere. The unexpected savior immediately began to defend the girl while hissing at the swindler. And while the heroine was wondering where this snake came from, Dietrich appeared next to her. It was then that it immediately became clear to whom exactly the basilisk belonged. This was unexpected news for the heroine, since the novel did not describe that Dietrich had had a pet snake since childhood. Moreover, it was surprising that the young man's aura turned bright red, although it usually did not change its color. The future villain, meanwhile, headed towards the swindler to punish him. Dietrich immediately told the man that he was trying to hurt a child from the Lagrange family. The young man then added that the presenter was accused of involving children in gambling, as well as assault. The swindler tried to justify himself by saying that he did not know about the noble origins of those with whom he was playing. However, ignorance does not exempt a man from the responsibility that he was obliged to bear. The punishment did not take long to come, but Anissa did not see it, because the snake covered her with itself. As soon as Dietrich dealt with the man, he immediately grabbed his sister by the hand and began to lead her somewhere. The heroine did not yet fully understand what was happening, and the young man did not answer her. After which it turned out that Yurik had never actually gone anywhere. Dietrich simply captured the young man in order to later get answers from him. However, the trapped boy had no intention of speaking in such a situation. But the future villain still didn't want to let Yurik go, because he wanted to know why he came to this place, and with his sister too. Dietrich believed that his captive had begun to forget who he shouldn't cross. Anissa saw that both boys' auras were glowing red, and she didn't like it. In the end, Yurik finally began to explain, saying that the girl simply wanted to see the city. But Dietrich was not satisfied with this answer, because he did not like the fact that his sister was taken from the castle without permission. Yurik was only required to protect Anissa, but he failed to do so. The young man didn't even notice how his girlfriend started playing a game with the swindler. So the future villain was going to take revenge on the boy for failing to complete his task. As soon as Anissa realized that the situation had escalated to the limit, she immediately rushed to save Yurik. Dietrich demanded that his sister step aside, but she had no intention of doing so. Instead, the girl tried to explain that it was she who insisted on going to the city. Anissa believed that Yurik had done nothing wrong and therefore did not deserve punishment. After all, the young man didn't want to go somewhere secretly from Dietrich, but the heroine persuaded him because she wanted to buy a lottery ticket. Because the girl was upset that she and her brother couldn't even afford sweets. Besides, sometimes the boys can't even eat properly, and so they are forced to hunt. Then Dietrich replied that he didn't really need all these riches. But Anissa understood that her brother was lying, because at least everyone wanted to eat normally. In any case, the guys were poor, and this fact was hard to deny. However, Dietrich still began to argue with his sister, saying that this was not so. After which, Veronica appeared and told the young man not to deceive himself. But even if this was all true, Dietrich still considered lottery tickets a waste of time. And then Veronica confessed exactly how much money she had spent on what the young man considered to be stupidity, after which the girl added that she was very sorry for not keeping an eye on Anissa. As it turned out, Veronica's mother had sent people after her, and she needed to get rid of the surveillance. After all, there was still a secret between the guys that the girl was helping Dietrich in exchange for the demon. After hearing all this, the boy only said that he understood everything, and then began to leave. Anissa, in turn, immediately ran after her brother, wanting to go with him. However, the girl did not succeed because her new acquaintance blocked her path. It was clear that Charlotte's mood had suddenly worsened when she learned that the heroine was from the Lagrange family. And the saint knew that this family had committed many bad deeds. And then Anissa asked her new friend what she should do about it now. Even though the Lagrange family was terrible, it was not the children's fault anyway. Charlotte was also surprised that a girl with such a pedigree did not look bad. As it turned out, the saint had an ability that allowed her to read people's hearts. And the girl clearly saw that her new acquaintance was a good person. After which Charlotte remembered that she had made a promise to tell about the prophecy. Then the saint said that if the blue-eyed girl became the bride of the north, then he would be saved. It has become known that rumors about this prophecy have been circulating in churches for a long time, and everyone knew that blue eyes were a huge rarity in the north. Charlotte came to this city to learn more about the prophecy, but found nothing, so the girl decided that this prediction could be false. The saint did not even realize that she was part of this prophecy, because as soon as Charlotte uses divine powers, her eyes will turn blue. In the novella, the saint became Dietrich's bride, the bride of the north, in order to save the Lagranges. However, this did not help because the Lagrange family still fell, and the villain Dietrich was sealed by the protagonist. But Anissa still believed that the prophecy was real, and Charlotte and Dietrich were connected by fate. In any case, everything goes according to the plot, so the heroine didn't have to do anything. As soon as Charlotte left, Anissa followed her brother. Luckily, we didn't have to look for the young man for long because he was waiting at the entrance. But as soon as the boys left, Dietrich began to pretend that he was walking alone and not with his sister. However, this did not last long because Anissa immediately began to attract the young man's attention by saying how much she missed him. The girl also began to complain to her brother that he had been paying little attention to her lately. The heroine wanted the boy to explain his behavior, but he was not going to do so. This really offended Anissa, so she puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. This behavior of his younger sister amused Dietrich, so he couldn't help but smile. The young man rarely showed his emotions, so Anissa watched these moments with joy. Then the heroine promised the boy that if she won the lottery, she would buy him sweets. But Dietrich only said that he didn't need anything because he was doing well as is. And then Anissa saw a toy that she really liked. The heroine even stopped, so much did the plush animal capture her attention. However, as soon as the heroine saw the price, she realized that she did not need this toy. But by this time, Dietrich had already managed to see what exactly had attracted his sister's attention. So, without thinking twice, the future villain swung, intending to break the glass. Anissa tried to stop her brother, but unfortunately to no avail. That's why very soon glass started to fall near the boy's feet. And at that very second, a toy appeared in Dietrich's hands that his sister liked so much. While Anissa stood there in complete shock, the young man was already handing her the treasured plush animal. After which the heroine noticed that the boy's hand began to bleed. But Dietrich said everything was fine and then asked if his sister would take the toy. Although Anissa didn't understand what the young man had in mind, she took the toy. And then the future villain said that money is not a problem for the Lagranges. At that very moment, the face of a shocked salesperson appeared in the store. The man came running to the noise and was very surprised when he saw what was happening, after which the seller ran out of the store wanting to know who did it. And then the future villain handed the man the seal of Derek Lagrange. The young man promised that his father would be able to compensate the seller for all losses. When everything was resolved, the guys left, asking the worker for forgiveness before leaving. And then Anissa asked her brother where he got this seal, and it turned out that he stole it. Dietrich decided that the seal would definitely be useful to him someday, and he was right. When the heroine said that stealing is bad, her brother remarked that such stupidity could only be heard in the South. The future villain didn't even realize that Anissa was actually a Southerner. After this, the boys went home, where a delicious lunch was already waiting for the girl. And while the little girl was eating, her maid noticed that Lancel had not been seen for a long time. However, Marilyn did not complain because she enjoyed looking after Anissa herself. And workers like Lancel would be better off just going to Leatrice. Although Anissa simply laughed at the maid's comments, they actually made her think. After all, Lancel really does nothing, but at the same time receives a full salary. So the heroine decided that she needed to find a lazy worker and annoy him. But then Anissa felt an aura with a strong smell hovering around her. The girl quickly guessed that Baal had simply come to see her, and she was not mistaken. But the demon simply had no choice, because it was Dietrich who ordered him to look after the child. So the heroine told the monster that he could do whatever he wanted, because he wasn't bothering her. After all, the main thing for Anissa now was to find Lancel and prevent him from resting. After which the girl found the worker sleeping peacefully away from people. As soon as Anissa approached the man, she felt that his aura was somehow strange this time. The heroine felt as if there was some strange smell coming from Lancel. And while the girl was trying to figure out what was wrong, the worker suddenly woke up. After which the man began to talk about how much Anissa scared him. And then the heroine began to cleanse the servant's aura so that he would feel at least a little better. However, this time something was bothering her, and it turned out that it was the black rose. The flower was emitting an unpleasant black mist, so Anissa decided to clean it too. With the rose, everything was much more difficult than with people, so this time I had to try harder. Then Lancel became afraid that his mistress was going to break this beautiful flower. Even though Anissa said it wasn't true, the rose actually ended up shattering into pieces. The girl never understood why this happened because she just wanted to cleanse her aura. Suddenly, an incomprehensible hissing sound began to come from the fragments of the plaster rose. And then Lancel asked the heroine if she was hurt because the flower broke right next to her hand. As soon as the man saw the small cut, he immediately began to worry. It all got to the point where the servant picked up the heroine in his arms to quickly carry her into the palace. And while Lancel was running back, he shouted to Marilyn that the lady was wounded. but Anissa hastened to stop the man, saying that she was fine. After this, the worker actually stopped running and then sat down on the ground. As soon as Lancel caught his breath, he began to ask the heroine if she had always been so cute. The servant began to praise Anissa, which made her think he had gone crazy. And then the man began to tell the girl to sit and wait for him. After which Lancel ran off somewhere, and only then did the heroine notice how his aura had changed. Previously, no matter how much Anissa purified the man, the fog around him remained dark blue. And this made the girl think that that black rose was cursed. It was this flower that influenced Lancel's aura, making it darker and more gloomy. Then Anissa suggested that this rose could not be the only one among all the decorations. So the heroine tried to use her powers to the maximum to find all the cursed items. And only after this did the girl realize that she and Dietrich were in big trouble.